She went under the wheels.
How affected.
Welcome to Under the Wheels. I'm Matthew.
I'm Gabe.
And in today's episode, we're getting psychological with Charlie Kaufman's new movie. I'm thinking of ending it, right? That's what it's called?
I'm thinking of ending things.
I'm thinking of ending things.
Available
yes.
on Netflix.
Available on... When was that released? I didn't even look...
Really recently.
Okay.
Right. Within the last couple of weeks.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Speaking of movies that were released within the last couple of weeks, Mulan cost $30 on Disney Plus, and it's just Chinese propaganda. Like, I really hope that movie makes no money, because, like, all it is just kowtowing to the Communist Party over there and their hatred of freedom worldwide. Because I know, like, the lead actress got in trouble for being like, yes, I support Hong Kong police, you can attack me now, whatever, I don't care, I'm a patriot. And it's like, oh God, you sound like a fucking Facebook mom. But
oh.
But like,
she's young too. She's just
young,
in the propaganda machine.
Oh, totally. And it's like, Hong Kong police? You mean the police that are just straight up murdering people?
It's funny because I just finished reading Noble House. It took me fucking all year to read it. But
that's what happens when you read James Clavell. Like, unless you're my dad, he read Shogun in one day.
No, really? Are you serious?
Yeah.
Holy cow.
He's like a high-level speed reader, though.
Oh, okay.
Because they used to teach speed reading in schools back in the 50s or whatever. So yeah, he read all of Shogun in one day.
That's insane to me. The thing is, though, like, have you read any James Clavell?
No, I just know his books are really long, and they all take place in Asia, but like the main characters are white people.
Yes, pretty much. And like the one thing he does in his books that I like, because they're 1,300 pages, 1,500 pages, 1,800 pages, he will constantly reintroduce characters because he expects people to not be like taking detailed notes as you're reading.
That's
so
smart.
like, yeah, it's a really good technique. Now they are a little weird, and it is kind of hard reading some of it nowadays because it's like there's a scene where the main character is like meeting this rich Chinese pirate who doesn't speak any English, and he's just like, he goes in and the Chinese pirate comes in, he's like, Blandy? And I'm like, oh my God. But I couldn't stop laughing. I was like, I'm going to hell for this. But it's okay. But yeah, like, it's interesting to read his stuff about Hong Kong and like the English occupation that was only supposed to last 99 years, and now all of the fallout that's happening because of it. And it's like, oh man, if only James Clavell could have lived another 15 years, it would have been interesting for him to comment on this.
I mean, the craziest fallout is that Hong Kong wants to go back to being a British colony.
Right, yes. I know, that's the most interesting thing to me. Like, and I don't blame them, because like, again, all of the history of Hong Kong that I know is like funneled through this like Australian wannabe British author who wrote a couple of scripts. But like, I can see how especially with well, not to get too political, but like with the way that the People's Republic of China,
it's okay to get political about China because they're evil.
So should we put the emperor back on the throne?
Well, the emperor is on the throne. His name is Xi Jinping.
I mean, like, the emperor.
Didn't he make himself president for life?
Yeah, I heard about that. It's like, hey, you know what? You know what the most communist thing in the world is? Making your president the president leader for life.
I know.
Jesus Christ. Oh, man.
There's a young, like, Chinese, I think he's Czech or Polish politician. Like, he's a member of parliament in some, like, Eastern European country. Mm-hmm. And he refers to himself as being Taiwanese. And that just pisses off China to no end, because they get so butthurt when you say Taiwan. Yeah,
right, because it's still in conflict, right?
Mm-hmm.
They want it back, and Taiwan wants, like, as we get super...
What annoys the hell out of me is, like, China, they're so sensitive about Taiwan, they make it so no one can say Taiwan. Like, you know, there's the World Health Organization, which is under fire because China funds them quite a bit. I mean, everyone funds the World Health Organization,
right?
Including
But China, right? But China has, because China pays their workers 10 cents on the dollar, if that, to manufacture. Although that's the interesting.
What I was going to say was...
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
There was, there's like a BBC journalist, or there's some journalist doing a call with a WHO representative, and, the guy was like outlining guidelines for dealing with COVID, and was kind of saying, it's like, yeah, there's a lot we still don't know, blah, 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 blah. And then the journalist was like, well, what about Taiwan? They have hardly any cases. What do you think of their response? And he's just like, and he just doesn't answer it. He just goes silent. And then it's like, anyway, blah, blah, blah. And she's like, whoa, wait. My question, I asked about Taiwan's response to the virus. And he said, I already talked about China. And then she's like, no. I'm asking you about Taiwan. Answer the question. And then he just hangs up. And this is like a white dude. Like, what the fuck, man?
Dude, working in customer service, I totally know what it's like to be the WHO person on the other end of that line. At least that guy has the ability to hang up. He doesn't have to use some sort of excuse like please stop using foul language, sir. Yes, I know that you want to do that to my mother. Please stop saying that, or else I'll have to hang up.
I feel like it's a thing that customer service people intentionally try to piss you off so that you swear, so they have an excuse to hang up.
It depends, because my experience is that if you come onto the call hot and you're not reciprocal and you don't listen, then when you start being belligerent, I will use that as a reason to hang up. Because again, the calls are recorded. I don't think, especially being in customer... Now, granted, this doesn't apply to all customer service representatives, because there are a lot of reps who are just really bad and are there to cash a paycheck, and they don't care. They don't need to do any investigation, and they don't know what they're doing. Now, with that said, a lot of the times people are calling in because they want to assault or be belligerent to the rep.
That's
so
true.
It's a weird two-way street, but again, I've been on calls where people are just they have an acid tone and they don't cuss, and you have to figure out the best way to handle it. And those are, from a video game perspective, oh, that would be a fun thing to do. That's a fun puzzle to solve. But in the moment when someone's like, so what you're saying is this thing isn't going to happen, and you're like, then it becomes...
So you're saying they should make a sequel to Papers, Please, but it's...
customer service reps, please.
Customer service, please. I'd like to speak to a person, please.
Well, that's the other thing. Anyone who's listening, if you're not getting your way with the person that you're talking to and you feel like you're being stonewalled, you should definitely... You don't get upset at them. Just ask for a manager as calmly as possible.
Yeah.
Because if they transfer you to a manager, then you're good. And if they don't transfer you to a manager, you can just call them right back and say, hey, I want to speak to a manager. This person cut me off. And it is important to take the person's name down, because if the person's not doing a good job on the phone, then you should out them to the manager so that the manager can review their calls and see what's going on.
Yeah.
PSA done. Yeah, don't watch Mulan.
Yeah, don't do it, guys. Don't pay $30 for trash that is also funding death camps, basically, in the western part of China. So yeah, don't do it, guys. It's bad.
It's just to quickly comment on Mulan for just a little bit. It's also disingenuous of the Walt Disney Company, because they wanted to make a version of Mulan that's, quote, more accurate, unquote, with dragon and witch ladies to the actual story. So they hire a mainly Chinese or mainly Asian cast, and then they staff the entire production with a bunch of white Hollywood types. But then because they want to still retain sort of the progressive or the woke crowd, they have a female director to direct it. But from everything that I've been hearing about the movie itself, there's a lot of confusion as to the thematic qualities in the movie. So even from a movie point of view, aside from the nostalgia that Disney has been marketing it on, which again, a movie that is not a remake of the animated movie being marketed like it's a remake of the animated movie, so that people who... I'm getting all my metaphors here confused, but it seems like a very disingenuous money-making effort, because it's like, here's how we're appealing to China, here's how we're appealing to the Western audiences, but really nothing good is going to come of it, because we have a bunch of actors who don't speak English marketing a movie to a bunch of people who speak English, and they're going to have to speak English even when we release it in China, where they can actually speak like Cantonese or Mandarin, which is probably their native language. But we're going to release it there in English with Cantonese or Mandarin subtitles. Yeah, like what is this monstrosity? And so, I mean, I was kind of against it from the get-go. I think if you were going to do this, you should have done like an Asian American cast. But and you know, that way you avoid the whole like conflict with fucking Hong Kong.
That way you sidestep the entire communism issues. You just have an Asian American cast.
Which is funny, because it's like, oh yeah, you know, we're going to try and sidestep we're going to market this to China, a communist nation, about the power of one individual rising above everyone.
I know. If for whatever reason Disney came to me and was like, we need you to do like a more gritty, realistic Mulan that's PG-13.
Is this PG-13?
Probably. I'd be like, okay. And then it would have Mulan like assassinating the emperor and overthrowing the government and I don't know, installing some kind of like hyper libertarian like feudal system just to go completely against everything that China's about.
I was gonna say, you do it like you take a page out of Lawrence of Arabia's book, and like she overthrows the emperor, she assassinates the emperor, overthrows the government, and then she's like, all right, I'm ready to install a new government, and then all the politicians come in and they're like, fuck you, we're gonna make it impossible for you to do anything. And so then she's just like stonewalled every direction. So then she goes away, she's riding a bicycle one day, flips over and dies, and they're like, oh, the story of Hua Mulan. Like that. That is how you end it. Well, I always liked that about Lawrence of Arabia, how like he's like he did it. He did the thing. And then he's like, I'm going to make
the world a better place.
Yeah, I'm going to make the world a better place.
No, you're not.
Well, yeah, I know. It's like, oh no, we already used you. We used you to do the thing you want to do, that we want you to do. The thing you want to do, bringing like power and stuff to these people. We're not going to let you do that. No, the king is the prince is the prince. You know, Obi-Wan Kenobi is going to be the ruler. Let's just leave it at that.
Pretty much. I saw something. Speaking of the British coming in to ruin the party, I saw something the other day where it's like a map of the British Isles, but it's just like Ireland, Scotland, and Wales, and there's kind of just like the British Channel just sort of extends into where England should be, and it says, "Hey guys, what if it was all just a bad dream?"
The world we live in.
Yep.
Or, are quarantined in, as it were.
No one gives a shit about the quarantine anymore. Everyone's going out and partying, basically. Yeah. We're having a heat wave out here, so everyone's at the beach.
Yeah, I saw that. I was like, because it gets hot over here in Georgia. Like it hits 90s. It's been like 80, to 86. But I've watched a couple of people like who are in California, and they're like, hey guys, it's 107, 110, like fuck. And I'm like, oh my god, I'm so glad I'm not in Southern California right now. Jesus fucking Christ. Or like, dude, if you're in San Francisco, and like if they are hitting record setting 101, 110 days, most of the places in San Francisco do not have air conditioning because they never need it. So be happy that hopefully.
Oh god, can you imagine the smell? All like the feces in the street is like cooking in that heat.
Oh god. Like all of there's like a dead homeless guy, and he's just like slowly turning into like a hamburger. Just like, Jesus fucking Christ. Oh man. On that happy note, I actually am curious, what have you been watching this last couple weeks?
Okay, what have I been watching? I watched Nicholas Roeg's most famous movie, Don't Look Now.
Never heard of it.
Really? It's like a thriller starring Donald Sutherland and other people. It's famous for its like crazy editing that's based more on like it's edited more on like mood and theme than on continuity. which has made it kind of a classic. Like, it's one of Christopher Nolan's favorite movies. So, I mean, it's a really fascinating film from a technical perspective. Story-wise, the plot is not that interesting. And the ending is a real letdown. Like, it's just like, ugh, that's it. But, like, technically it's fascinating because it is this really cool, like it's shot very well and it's edited in a really cool way where, again, like, it's not so much editing for continuity of time, but continuity of ideas. So it's like there's a discrete set of kind of symbolic images that are repeated in various scenarios to tell the story. And it's cut to kind of for the continuity of those things. And the other part of it is like, so the basic plot of the movie is there's a husband and wife whose daughter drowns. She's almost saved by the husband, but he's a little bit too late. And the only reason he knows is that she's in danger is because he has a weird premonition. And then later they go to Venice, and they're still kind of like dealing with the death of their daughter, but trying to ignore it. And the wife meets another pair of like English pensioners, basically, who one of them is a psychic and says like, I can see your daughter, she's very happy, but she wants you to get out of Venice. And then they start like seeing manifestations of their daughter in various places, and they start fighting more because their wife thinks like their daughter's ghost is following them around. And then there's also like a serial killer going around murdering people in Venice. And then it turns out the husband also has like latent psychic powers of his own. So it's like a lot of the film is edited based on the husband's perspective, where like he is experiencing his life in real time, but he's also having premonitions of the future. And they're cut together so that they happen simultaneously, and it doesn't really all come together until the very end, when he has a sudden realization of like everything he's been seeing suddenly making sense. But the problem is like when it all comes together, like if you pay any attention at all, you're 45 minutes ahead of him in movie time. And yeah, and it's like the revelation isn't that crazy or interesting.
Right, because especially if you've been even if you're not paying attention.
Yeah, even if you're not paying attention, it's just like, oh, that's it.
Oh.
So yeah, it's a really interesting movie from a technical perspective, but it's otherwise kind of just okay.
Yeah, I'll just watch the CinemaSins video on it so they can ding everything that's wrong with it.
I don't think CinemaSins would ever do a video on Don't Look Now because it's from the 70s. It's not gonna. The YouTube algorithm won't like it. But okay, so what else did I see? I watched Battles Without Honor and Humanity. It's a documentary about American politics in the 21st century.
Seijun Suzuki was ahead of his time, right? It was Seijun Suzuki, right?
It's Kenji Fukusaku.
Oh, okay. All right.
So yeah, Battles Without Honor and Humanity, Part 1 in his like 5-part Japanese gangster epic from the 1970s. And I've come to a realization that like 1960s and 70s Yakuza movies are like my jam. I love them. Battles Without Honor and Humanity is great. It's a definite like high witness or low shiny and chrome.
Okay.
It's kind of
love
like
Yakuza films, so I should check it out.
Yeah, it's really good. It's basically like if someone took The Godfather and compressed it into 90 minutes. Because it's like, it's got this ensemble cast of characters who you follow from the very end of World War II through like the mid-1950s. As like post-war Japan is in like this horrible depression, and they're kind of these opportunistic young men who become Yakuza and start their own family, and then eventually how the family falls apart due to infighting and like everyone constantly jockeying for power. And
yeah, it sounds like a Yakuza film to me. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And it's Battles Without Honor and Humanity. The title is kind of, it's reflective of the themes of the movie. It's sort of like Well, yes.
Let me tell you what this movie is about. It's about people fighting without honor and humanity.
Well,
because Japanese Yakuza.
At that time, a lot of Yakuza movies were very romantic about the Yakuza, whereas this is intended to be a lot more realistic and basically say these are not heroes. There's nothing romantic about what they do, and it's kind of about how these guys, they come from nothing, they make something of themselves, and they are very ambitious, and they do all these things, but it's about how all of their efforts are kind of for nothing,
Yeah.
They go through hell and basically win nothing from it, because it all just sort of falls apart. But it's a really good movie. It's tight, 90 minutes, really fast-paced. I mean, it's hard to keep track of the characters at first, but as you go, it starts to make sense. There's some good bits of physical comedy in there. There's the cliched scene where a guy gets his chops off his finger as an apology, but he doesn't know how to do it, so someone else has to show him, and then he does it, and his finger gets he chops off his finger so hard it shoots off outside. And gets and then him and all his Yakuza buddies are trying to find his finger, because it's if we lose the finger, then the apology doesn't mean anything. And then the one guy starts looking in a chicken coop, and the finger's pecked to pieces. And he's like, "Well, guys, I found it." And then they take it to the other Yakuza boss who they're apologizing to, and he's like, "Oh, you didn't need to do this. You could have just said you were sorry."
Dude, I love Yakuza movies that deconstruct the romanticized notions of Yakuza, which is why I like Drunken Angel and why I absolutely hate The Outsider.
That Jared Leto movie?
Yeah, which I've watched twice because I was like, maybe I was
why
wrong.
Why do you
maybe
watch all these awful movies more than once?
Well, one, I wanted to watch it because I like Yakuza movies in general. But then I was like, it really can't, Jared Leto really can't be that bad, right? Because at least Tadanobu Asano's pretty much generally good in what he's in, and he's good in this too, but fuck, man. Part of me just keeps watching it wishing that Tom Hardy were in it, and it was directed by Nicholas Winding Refn.
Oh my gosh, that would be amazing.
The other part of me wishes they just jettisoned Jared Leto, who should really not have a career, which, I really believe that Jared Leto should not have a career acting. I don't think he's very good. And even on the times that he's good, I just don't like him. And they should have just put Emil Hirsch in the role, because it would have been even more entertaining with Emil Hirsch, because he's in the movie. He plays this soldier who recognizes Jared Leto, who's just gone full on he's gone full on native. And I just imagine it with Emil Hirsch, because he's a pretty decent actor, but he's got boyish good looks, and he's kind of he's a strange guy, and I think he would have been a good fit in that role as this stone cold Yakuza assassin. He would have brought some ability. But anytime they have a finger cutting scene in any of those movies, I always think of The Outsider and how just fucking horrible and stupid it was in that movie, where they're explaining why they need to cut off the finger. And
oh my gosh.
So
yeah,
the fact
Battles
that
Without Honor
and
and Humanity was it was considered a landmark at the time, because this is 1974. For taking a more kind of cynical eye towards the Yakuza, and kind of deconstructing and sometimes even making fun of a lot of the tropes that Yakuza movies use, to the point where it's almost taken for granted, in The Outsider. Because a lot of the characters, none of the characters except for really one are shown to be particularly noble, and the guy who is noble is constantly getting screwed over. He spends most of the movie in prison, because he's super earnest and is always trying to do right by everybody. But then everyone else is cowardly and conniving and weirdly pathetic. The boss of the family is always crying and begging. And he's always stealing money from his own men. So yeah, it's a really good movie. Battles Without Honor and Humanity. It's a 5-part series, but I just watched the first one. The first one's great.
You have Prime, is that correct?
Yeah.
Is that where you watched it?
Yeah, I think all of the Battles Without Honor and Humanity movies are on Prime.
Okay. That's gonna go straight to the top, or that, and there's another one we were talking about, Frida, last time, and I'm like, I should probably watch it just to see
that's
Jeffrey Rush's.
Yeah, it's on Netflix.
That's on
I don't know if
Netflix.
it's still on Netflix, 'cause I watched it like 2 months ago.
Oh, fuck. One last thing about the Yakuza thing, I feel like like what you said about like the really honorable guy, that's basically the first game of the Yakuza series, or the Like a Dragon series, and I always like that, where you have like let's take what people think is, the noble samurai wannabe in the Yakuza, and then actually put them in like what the Yakuza actually is, which is like, a corrupt gangs, a high level corrupt gang that controls a lot of things in Japan. Like, it's something to be this corrupt. There's no way they could have any, honor or humanity, as the case may be. Yeah. So like, it does make sense that like the guy who's like, I want to be a modern day samurai, just gets fucked over all the time. So
Yep.
Yeah, I'm interested in watching it. I like things that are hypercritical of romanticized notions, which is ironic because I'm a big Spielberg fan.
Yeah, and a Disney fan.
Yes, and a Disney fan.
And the last movie I watched in this intervening period was Suburban Sasquatch, which is, I mean, it's awful, but hilarious.
It's worth a watch?
It's worth a watch after a few drinks, because it's like, it is... I mean, the thing with a lot of these really terrible movies is they're prone to stretches of being really boring. Like, there's dialogue scenes that just don't end. And, The Room, it keeps a pretty tidy pace. Like, it's always on to something funny. Or same thing with, Samurai Cop or Miami Connection. Like, they always move to a new... There's always something so stupid it's hilarious happening. Whereas there are chunks of Suburban Sasquatch that just drag endlessly, where characters recycle the same conversations over and over again with their terrible acting.
They're stretching it out to be 90 minutes.
Yeah, exactly. Stretching it out to be 90 minutes. And the movie was made in 2004, so there's a lot of Microsoft Paint level CGI. There's this Native American warrior priestess lady who's just some chick in a fringy dress. And she's got magic arrows that are all look like they were made using clip art. And there's a lot of awful CGI. There's a lot of awful acting. All of the night scenes are day for night, but it's not even good day for night. It's just someone put a pair of sunglasses in front of the camera while they were filming. So everything's just slightly shaded, but it's supposed to be nighttime. And then they keep mentioning what I presume is supposed to be an environmental subtext. They're always talking about oh yeah, this place used to be really heavily forested until they started developing it and building suburban homes and stuff. Every character who gets killed says something to that effect. So it's just getting hammered at you throughout the whole movie. But you never see any houses. It's just all in the woods pretty much. And it never really gets tied together at the end. It's just sort of that whole environmental subtext is just dropped. It's kind of woke window dressing, which, is most movies. But the biggest criticism I have is I wish there were more Sasquatch kills, because those are the best parts of the movie. He'll... the Sasquatch will appear, and it'll make that weird noise. And someone will be like, ah! And, he'll attack them. And a lot of the time, it cuts away, and you see just bones flying through the air. But yeah, it's a good terrible movie.
Nice.
What have you been watching lately?
I'll keep it short because I have a full hour of lunch that I watch movies during. But a lot of them have been retreads, watching The Town and Heat back to back, because every time I watch The Town, I want to watch Heat. Heat's, the perspective of cops versus criminals, and it kind of takes the side of the cops, and The Town is cops versus criminals, and it takes the side of the thieves. So that's kind of the biggest difference between the two. But The Town, you've seen The Town, but you have not seen Heat. Is that correct, or have you seen both of them?
I've seen Heat, but I have not seen The Town.
Got it. Okay, so I think the best summary of The Heat, or not The Heat, of Heat, that I've heard is it's an epic scale cops and robbers game. I'm like, yeah, that's true. It's like you give me a huge budget and the best actors to play cops and robbers, and it's great. Spoiler for Heat for anyone who hasn't seen it, and Saving Private Ryan. Like, for a while, Tom Sizemore in the 90s just kept playing guys named Mike who die. So that's fun. And like, Heat's great, you know. Al Pacino's so everywhere. Yes. But it's really good. Like, the scenes, there's like that really kind of goofy staged scene where like Wayne Grow kills the one like 17-year-old girl, and like they find the body, and Al Pacino's like, another dead body here, or whatever he says, and like the mom is there and is like, who called her? And she like breaks the police line and starts running, and like Al Pacino's hugging her, and the music swells to this big moment, and like she's ugly crying, and Al Pacino's just like, no, like avoiding showing her. And it's like, that's a really emotional moment. I don't think it built up to be a really emotional moment.
No, it doesn't.
Like,
it just comes out of nowhere.
Yeah, it's like, oh, that's kind of weird.
I mean, the thing is, like, Al Pacino's amazing when he reins it in that movie.
Yeah.
But then there's, like, the scene where he's interrogating Hank Azaria.
Yes, the best scene.
And he just goes full Pacino, like, just Scarface to the max. And it's like, oh, gosh, he just killed this entire scene.
Yeah, because, like, why did I ever get involved with her? Cue Al Pacino.
Because she got a great ass! And you got your head all the way up it!
But like it's also, that's the first time I watched the movie on Blu-ray where like I noticed how bad Ashley Judd's acne was, and like how much makeup is just caked over her pimples. It's like, geez, because she had to be pretty young in that movie playing Val Kilmer's wife. But I was like, oh my god. And like Val Kilmer's weird elbow in that one scene, and it's good. I'm not selling it really well, but he is amazing. But the town is like Heat, but told from the view of like, it's kind of like a mix between Thief and Heat. And like part of me thinks you'll really like it, but also part of me thinks that you won't. But it's, you know, depressed, our favorite, you know, downtrodden, depressed Ben Affleck.
Ben Sadfleck?
Ben Sadfleck in the original Ben Sadfleck performance, directing the movie, and John Hamm as an FBI investigator who's trying to get them. Rebecca Hall's really good as well, and they, similar to like a Michael Mann movie, Ben Affleck wanted all of the heists to be as realistic as possible, and it kind of like extends to like there's a lot of non-actor in very small roles here and there, so like you get like these moments of like, you know, South Boston citizens like trying to act but doing really bad Matt Damon improv. But like, you know, it's like it was that time where that's whole like, oh, real people add flavor to the movie, quote unquote. It's like, I guess. But the climactic sequence is really good, and Pete Postlethwaite's in it. He's really good. What's his name? Paul Thomas Anderson's DP shot the movie, so that's, you know, that's something. Yeah, it's a good looking movie, and Jeremy Renner's really good in it too. Like all of the actors are really good. So like if you have not seen The Town, for me it's like a high witness, but I've watched it a couple times. I prefer the director's cut of it, the extended edition, but the original cut of the movie is also really good. So yeah, if you haven't checked it out, you should. And then just to kind of like cap it off, I did watch Bill and Ted Face the Music. Oh,
how much did that cost you?
It ended up costing me $20, but I, because my card was the card on file, I did not watch it, like go out of my way to watch it. It was people in my house wanted to watch it, and I was like, well, it's only going to be 90 minutes, so I guess I'll go and see it. And I think the whole Bill and Ted series is written by one of the screenwriters for Men in Black. Now, have you seen any of the Bill and Ted movies?
I've seen Bogus Journey.
Really? That's the one I have not seen.
I really like that movie. I thought it was really funny, at least when I was a kid. I don't know if I'd still enjoy it as much, but I really liked it.
The thing about Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure is that it's really weird watching them go back in time and get people like Napoleon and Abraham Lincoln and like Beethoven and all these people that I'm like, I've seen them portrayed in other movies, like with Abraham Lincoln, they get, you know, like I'm Abraham Lincoln and I talk like this. And I'm like, you know what would be funny is if they remade it, but they like got Daniel Day-Lewis to play Abraham Lincoln again. But the movies aren't the best, but they all have their own internal logic when it comes to time traveling, which I really appreciate. And so like Bill and Ted Face the Music, it's like when Austin sent us a message and he was like, oh, this is really bad. I was like, what did you expect? It's kind of a goofy, you know, it's like it's a stupid comedy made nowadays with two actors who are hyper aware of them.
Knowing Austin, it's probably just like...
Oh, I know why.
Well, yeah, Tosin Abasi was the guitarist for, I think, the song that they play to save the universe or whatever. And I think he's just disappointed it wasn't like some 7-minute long, rambling, progressive metal piece.
I mean, it's the guitar riff. You have not seen it, correct?
I have not seen it yet.
Okay. The guitar riff they use is like, it's pretty long and it's pretty dope. I was like listening to it. I was like, fuck yeah, dude, this is awesome. No, the reason Austin won't like it is because Bill and Ted have 2 daughters and you don't care about the movie, right? I can spoil it.
I
will avoid spoiling. I will avoid spoiling it, but I think there's a lot of like, as he would probably put it, like pandering to the woke crowd. Like a lot of the supporting characters are women. There's a lot more emphasis on people of color than in Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, where everyone they grabbed was like a white dude from Europe. And so I think that is kind of what did it for him, where he was like, ugh, there's too much this in the movie. Like if I had to pin it on one thing.
Maybe. I wouldn't be surprised if it's literally just Tosin Abasi's guitar performance was not as awesome as he wanted it to be.
What band? Well, that's I feel like that's the other hard thing is like, oh, hey, I'm going to get you to do this thing in this movie. And it's like, oh, okay, cool. Well, I'm being paid for it and it's on a deadline, so I can never make it as awesome as I want it to be. And so... You know, I'm sure that's playing into it, but also knowing Austin, I think a certain amount of pandering he would find as very upsetting overall. Although it is funny watching like John Wick shaped Keanu Reeves with his like a little bit of sagging neck right behind his chin. Yep. Like he's doing his like John Wick run around as he's running around with like Alex Winter, who hasn't really been in front of the camera in like years. Yeah,
well, it's funny because like there's a thing for a while where people are like, man, Keanu Reeves really has not aged. He's like eternally young, and then in the last 3 years, like time has just caught up with him. So now you see him in Bill and Ted Face the Music.
Face the Music,
like,
and he looks old as fuck.
Gosh.
Yeah, it didn't help that he cut his beard. Like the beard helped kind of keep him looking young.
Oh, absolutely. While.
But he gets rid of the beard, and all of a sudden you see all the lines around his mouth, and you're like, Jesus Christ, he's old. But, you know, with age, you know, his acting became better. So it's fun.
Yeah,
they have good chemistry still. They, as in Alex Winter and Keanu Reeves, they still have chemistry. And I was like, oh, man, I hope they hang out on the weekends and stuff. But I know they probably don't.
Bill and Ted's Turkey Neck, save the universe. I mean, we'll all be there one day, but...
Well, like, I was actually kind of surprised because, like, Alex Winter, like, his face looks old, but it doesn't actually look that bad. Like all of his features look more refined, I guess. But I was like, he could still probably voice young Ted or young Bill. Sorry, young Bill. Oh my God, I don't want to upset the most loyal fan base ever. But I do love how it has a lot of fun with sort of like predestination paradox and jokes like that. So
okay,
it's fun.
Yeah, I'll probably watch it at some point. I was thinking of reviewing it for this show, but then I was like, I don't want to pay $20.
Yeah, I know.
Let's watch the Charlie Kaufman movie instead.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm interested because I've seen Tenet. I'm interested if you're going to see it are theaters open in California right now?
No.
Okay, so there's no way you could see it anyway unless you like drove to Nevada or something.
Pretty much. So you went to like an actual movie theater, sat in the dark for 2.5 hours, like the old days.
Yeah, so what happened was I had to see the IMAX version, so I paid $20. But I went to a theater. They had 2 seats to my left that were not available, and 3 seats to my right that were not available. Mm-hmm. I went in and I watched it with my mask on the whole time, but there were a lot of people who took their masks down. You can take your mask down if you're eating food and stuff, and I like almost bought a soda, and I was like, nah.
That's smart. You
Yeah.
can, because no one wants to wear their mask, and so you're like, you can only take it off if you're eating. So you
Actually,
just have
that is
people eat
smart.
constantly, and they're constantly getting more food from the counter,
Well,
which is
I
where
mean,
all the money's made for those theaters.
Right. Which I guess I come in a difficult spot because like I support buying concessions at the theater you frequent a lot because that's how they make their money. With that said, I go to an AMC, and AMC, they're like the Disney of freaking theater owners, and they're like slowly taking over everything. But I still support buying concessions because, you know, then the people who are working there get their money, yada, yada, yada. Now, with that said, I didn't buy concessions here. And if you get a large thing of popcorn, theoretically, you should not finish that whole thing in one sitting. Theoretically.
You'd be
Did I lose?
surprised.
Okay. Yeah. My dad will finish the whole thing before the movie fucking begins, so he can get the
Yeah, I
so he
think
can get the free refill.
The weirdest food experience I've ever had in the theater was with Rogue One. Like, I saw it, the day it came out, so it was a packed theater. The guy next to me had more food than I thought. Like, he had to be a pretty high roller to afford the amount of food that he had with him, given movie theater prices. And he just spent the entire movie, like, unwrapping shit, eating. Like, there was just... Like, as Jyn Erso was being a boring sad sack, I could just hear, like, wrappers crumpling and chewing noises.
You're like, I know I spent money to go in and see Rogue One, but I kind of just want to watch the guy eating a bunch of food while watching Rogue One. It's more interesting than what's going on in the movie right now.
And the best part, though, was when Darth Vader, like, whips out his lightsaber in the dark. You know, the whole theater went like, oh. But this guy, with, like, a mouthful of food, went like, oh, yeah. And I'm just like, I like, if I wasn't there with my brother and he wasn't super into the movie, I would have laughed because Rogue One just bored me to tears. But that little moment,
that was the straw. You were like, oh, this is fucking disgusting. I think about, like, I kind of wish I could go to a baseball game and just buy a shit ton of food, but of course we can't go to baseball games right now. Sad face.
and stadium food is also like prohibitively expensive.
It is that I used to think that like theme park food was the most expensive food, but it's by far stadium food. I think like theater food comes just under it, unless you're going to like, you know, El Capitan or whatever, where it's like, this is the Disney theater, so we're gonna charge you fucking $20 for gold-plated popcorn or whatever. It'd be like $150,000 for gold-plated popcorn. My bad. I can't believe people eat gold stuff,
Like
as
gold leaf things.
Yeah, like the golden, the golden chicken tenders or whatever.
Well, it's crazy because
really
like
big.
you know, there's all those videos of like food travel shows where it's like, we're gonna go eat the most expensive burger in the world. We're gonna drink the most expensive milkshake in the world. And like the way that they jack up the price is not with like quality burger ingredients. It's just putting gold leaf on everything.
I have a better one for you. There was Carl's Jr. was offering like the $6 burger, but it was like the $1,000 burger, and they're like, oh my god. And so I looked into it, and it's like you get one $6 burger, one order of fries, and like a bottle of wine that's worth $1,000. I was like, I don't think that counts, guys.
No, but like it's because there's no way to conceivably make a $50 burger without covering it in like edible gold, which is the dumbest shit ever.
This is from a 25-year-old cow in Japan that only grows on one island. It costs $500,000 to import the beef. Slices it off, there's mold inside. Eat it. You know, like makes it into a hamburger with like mold over it. It's like, this is a $200,000 burger. Enjoy it. It's like, I think that's probably where I draw the line, is like if a meal costs over, unless it's being comped, if a meal costs over, I would say like $100 for one person. I don't know if it's worth it at that point for me.
Yeah. I don't know why. I just had this image in my mind. There's this an investment salesman named Peter Schiff, who is known for constantly predicting, like, the end of the world economically is right around the corner, and you got to buy all the gold you can. It also helps that he's a gold broker.
Of course.
But I just imagine him going to these fancy restaurants, ordering the gold leaf covered burger, and then like pulling off all the edible gold and stuffing it in his pocket.
He's like in the cab. It's like 105-degree day. He's got like all that chicken skin in his pocket. He's like in the cab, and they're like, "Oh my god, what's that disgusting smell?" He's like,
it's like, "Oh, this guy reeks." He's like, "Buy gold, the world is ending."
Buy gold, the world's gonna end today. Buy gold. I just went and spent a bunch of money on getting more gold.
Buy gold, especially buy gold from me.
At a certain point, he just takes the gold leaf, takes like cheap like cinder block and covers it in gold, and he's like, "Look at these new gold bars. It'll work. It's like, why does it smell like chicken? It's like, ignore that. It's fine. It's fine. Oh my god. Speaking of like disgusting eating, let's talk about the movie whose name I can never get right. I'm Thinking of Ending Things.
Yes, Charlie Kaufman's latest movie about thinking.
Did you see? Let's start here. What's your relationship with Charlie Kaufman's movies? You know me, I always like to start with relationships.
Yeah. Let me see, because I've seen, I think, every movie he's directed, and a good number of the ones he's written. Hold on, let me pull up his...
Yeah.
So I've seen Being John Malkovich, Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, and Adaptation, which he's written all three of those.
Right.
And then I have also seen each of the movies he's directed. So Synecdoche, New York, Anomalisa, and I'm Thinking of Ending Things.
Okay, you have a good background on it then. Okay. Mm-hmm. I don't. I've seen Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, Anomalisa, and now I'm Thinking of Ending Things. Well, and Confessions of a Dangerous Mind, but that's kind of a weird outlier. Right? That's the one with... is this the one where Sam Rockwell plays a CIA assassin? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Confessions of a Dangerous Mind were good. Okay. I'm surprised you saw Anomalisa. You're like the only other person in the world who's seen it. So, would you consider yourself a fan?
Yeah. His movies are always really interesting. So, it's... I don't think I've ever disliked anything he's done.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, from what I can tell, all his movies seem super personal. And because Charlie Kaufman strikes me as someone who's incredibly neurotic, his movies are incredibly neurotic. And because they're all about thinking, it's like, they're fascinating because it's like the entire world of the film is like this paranoid identity crisis world, Like Synecdoche, New York is almost a masterpiece because it's basically, Philip Seymour Hoffman is this crazy neurotic playwright, i.e. Charlie Kaufman, whose entire reality becomes shaped by this play he's trying to stage where he builds an entire world inside of a warehouse that is just vignettes from his life. But to make it as realistic as possible, he wants to build he not only wants to do a play that's basically vignettes from his life, but he wants to build the entire planet around it so it has context, and ends up becoming so bloated it all collapses on itself. But it's really fascinating because it totally literalizes all of his characters' thoughts and feelings and actions, and he's constantly dealing with problems in his real life, which he tries to then recreate, relive, and then solve in the world of the play that he's making, which ends up destroying the play because he's constantly changing it, and he spends 40 years working on it and it never gets produced or never gets shown to anybody, But I'm Thinking of Ending Things is kind of has a very similar vibe to it. I mean, Anomalisa is a lot more focused. The scope of it is a lot narrower, I think, which I think is probably a good thing, because if you made this many sprawling movies, you'd just go insane. Not that Charlie Kaufman isn't probably already insane.
I'm surprised he was able to make another movie after Anomalisa, because I know after Synecdoche, I'm never going to be able to say it. Synecdoche, New York. Synecdoche, New York. After that, I think he was kind of blackballed for a while, and he had to go to Kickstarter to get like part of the funding for Anomalisa. So I was like, oh man, we're about to lose like a great screenwriter to, like nothing.
Yeah.
Like he's going to go to the void. So I was very happy when you told me about this movie.
Yeah, no, I was happy to see that it came out. I mean, I'm thinking of ending things. So for folks who are not in the know, it's about a young couple, boyfriend and girlfriend, who've been together for like 2 months, and they go on a road trip to meet the boyfriend's parents, and they argue about various issues with their relationship and philosophical issues as well. And the visit with the parents is very creepy and surreal, and then, like Synecdoche, New York, and Anomalisa, the whole thing collapses under itself because it's a movie about thinking and about the human mind. So it's incredibly neurotic and incredibly chaotic.
So I was actually going to try and change this episode up, and I was going to just have you explain what exactly happened in the movie, because when I finished the movie, I was not 100% sure what happened.
Yeah.
So then I went back because I was wondering if they were going to have that sort of like eureka moment where it would tie everything up. Like, this is what is happening. So I went and I read a synopsis of the plot just to make sure I didn't miss anything, because it was very late at night when I was watching it, and I may have or may not have been going in and out of sleep, which is kind of a shame because like there's a lot that I like in the movie.
I was going to say, the movie really, it held my attention. I thought it was really fascinating and very, like, there's a strain of...
Yes,
of
I agree with you.
tension that goes throughout the whole movie that definitely keeps you engaged, whereas, like, I can definitely see people getting bored by Anomalisa or Synecdoche, New York, because they're tonally more like a drama. Whereas this movie is a drama, but tonally is kind of has like a sort of a thriller or horror movie tone to it. Right. Nothing scary ever happens, but it's more there to kind of sustain your interest as a viewer, which I think is really clever.
Yeah, I think that's clever. I think from a technical point of view, they do a lot of interest. It reminded me a lot of Locke. If you watched Locke, because they shoot, like, a lot of the conversation takes place in the car. But at first I thought the editing was going to like really upset me, because it's like all of it is edited in a very almost staccato way where it's a little bit jarring. But then about 5 minutes in, it's
like uncomfortable editing.
Right. It's an intentional thing to sort of like, it creates a psychological effect in the viewer so that they're aware of the editing, or they're aware when something is cut off or when something is punctuated. And I like there are little clues throughout about what's going on just in the basic structure of like how a scene is built. So like she'll be thinking of something, and then Jesse Plemons, who I'm still like, I guess I like him as an actor, but I'm still kind of confused about how he has such a great career. Like that's good. That's my main question about the movie. But like he'll cut her off in the middle of one of her thoughts, and at first you're like, oh yeah, that's very similar to real life, where you'll be like thinking about something and someone will cut you off. But then it starts to happen more and more and more. And so like all of those, like from a technical level, I like a lot of the movie. Again, the fact that it's shot in like 4:3, I find interesting, and I'm curious myself about like how to determine that. But I did cut you off. I was going to have you interpret it, but I did read a synopsis of the plot just to make sure I understood everything that I saw in order. And then I found out this is based off of a book, so I also went back and read a synopsis of the book. So I have a pretty good understanding of what I think happened, and also what sort of things changed in the adaptation. So I can come at it from that angle.
I mean, there's a decent bit that was changed in the adaptation. I mean, the Tulsi town in the book is a Dairy Queen, so the Blizzard pun actually works.
Yeah. Well, copyright laws.
But yeah, so I guess, do you want me to try and explain what is literally happening in the movie?
You can either explain literally what's happening, or we can start talking about interpretations of what happened. But I was gonna have you try and explain the movie to me, because I was very confused, and I want to see what you got out of it. Now, do you know the differences between the book and the and the movie.
Yeah, I mean, I read the
Okay.
synopsis of both, but the synopsis of the movie is basically what I got from watching it. So it
Gotcha.
didn't really illuminate anything new.
Yeah, that's how I felt after reading the synopsis. We can either just get into spoilers now, because I'm really interested in talking about the explanation and how Kaufman sort of formatted the way that he presented the information to make it fresher than a lot of other stories that kind of follow a similar trajectory. But if there's something else you want to talk about, we can talk about that as well.
Let's just start spoiling it, because I think a lot of the more technical things that I would want to talk about make more sense
Yes.
once the movie's been spoiled. So, okay. Young couple goes to visit the boy's parents. The woman is thinking of ending their relationship, and she has like a lot of, again, she is very neurotic and is constantly thinking about all kinds of things, most of which are fairly negative, and her thoughts are always being interrupted by the boyfriend, who can sometimes sort of read her mind. They meet the parents, who are very weird and funny and creepy, played by Toni Collette and David Thewlis. And
We're
the parents
always weird and charming and creepy at the same time.
Yes, they're always weird and charming and creepy, and they're always jumping around in time. The woman explores the farmhouse where her boyfriend grew up. The boyfriend's name is Jake. The woman doesn't have a name. Her name is constantly changing. So it's Lucy at first, then it's like Amy, and then it's other stuff. And they talk about how they met. They talk about all kinds of things. I mean, everyone in the movie is always talking about stuff. There's a basement that she's not supposed to go in, but she goes in anyway, and it's just like a laundry room where the young man's old paintings are kept, which he's sort of ashamed of, and the washer, which is full of janitor uniforms. She goes to his like childhood bedroom, which is full of books and movies, which are quoted throughout the movie. Like, the woman recites a poem that she supposedly wrote, but it's actually from a book. Later on, she criticizes A Woman Under the Influence, which is, and she's just quoting a review from Pauline Kael, whose book is in the bedroom.
Okay, I didn't catch that she was quoting directly from, like, her criticism was basically just taking what Pauline Kael said. I did not catch that.
Yeah, so her criticism
I did see
is
the
what
book,
Pauline
though.
Kael said.
I did see the book. Got it.
And then, there's a blizzard outside, and then they eventually decide to get in the car and go home because the woman is work in the morning, and they continue to argue and fight, and their conversation is really long and takes on all these different shapes, and then they stop for blizzards at like not Dairy Queen, but a different Dairy Queen
Tulsi
ripoff,
Town.
basically, Tinsy Town.
Tinsy Town.
And then they get tired of the blizzards, so they go to the guy's old high school to throw them away, and end up getting lost in the high school where there's an extended dream sequence. Parallel to this, there's scenes of a janitor going around this high school cleaning it up during the day and kind of observing all the students and wistfully remembering, when he was young. And a lot of what he sees coincides with things that the woman and Jake say to each other and to Jake's parents. And then it all comes together where at the end, the janitor goes home for the day and he goes out in this blizzard, gets in his car, and it's revealed that this old janitor guy is Jake, that his parents died a long time ago, that this woman is some girl he maybe saw at one point but never interacted with, and this is all just his kind of ruminating on what could have been had his life gone slightly differently. And then he kind of has a mental breakdown where he imagines himself winning a Nobel Peace Prize, or not a Nobel Prize for physics, and his acceptance speech is Russell Crowe's acceptance speech from A Beautiful Mind.
I didn't catch that either.
And then he sings a song from Oklahoma. Well, because there's a bit in the movie where I think they quote Emerson, how no one is original, everyone is just an amalgamation of things that they've seen. So Jake's imaginary life is just an amalgamation of things that he's seen and read. Like,
Right.
And
He's basically
then-
Matt Damon from Good Will Hunting.
Yeah, exactly. And then it's uncertain if the janitor freezes to death in his car or if he's just kind of inside the high school having a mental breakdown and the blizzard passes.
Okay. Um, so on my first pass through, I kind of assumed that the janitor, just watching it, I kind of assumed the janitor was going to be Jake, the Jesse
I think
Plemons character.
if you're attentive enough, about maybe 45 minutes to an hour in, you'll make that connection that the janitor is Jake.
Just to be clear, though, the movie never explicitly stated it. Is that correct? It's all through context cues?
Sort of. At the end, when the janitor has a mental breakdown in his car, he sees himself as Jake.
Okay. All right. Okay. I'll have to review that part. Okay, that makes sense then. I think that was the part that I was missing. I was like, well, what's the janitor's connection? Like,
well, there's also a lot of stuff that like gets said and done throughout the movie that makes sense.
Right.
Once you put it together, that Jake is the janitor. Like there's that whole bit where Jake is caring for his parents as they get really old, and he's really like angry and upset about their condition. Yeah. And his girlfriend comes up to him and says, like, I see you. I see that you're a devoted son and you take good care of your parents and you're doing the best that you can. And then she has that internal monologue with herself where it's like, is this my purpose just to validate Jake and, be a valid validator by showing off how cool I am? And then later when she's at the high school and runs into the janitor's like, she says, have you seen Jake? And he's like, well, I see you, So there's that kind of brings it back to like, it's almost like that James Cameron-y, like, I see you.
Yeah. His avatar turns out to be freaking Jesse Buckley.
Yeah, where it's like, part of Jake's whole thing is like he's lived an entire life unnoticed by anyone. So he wants to be seen by someone. He wants someone to see that he exists, because like the kids at the school don't notice him,
or if they do, they're unsettled by him.
Yeah. He wants someone to notice him and kind of approve of him. He wants Senpai to notice him.
Oh my god.
That kind of like that circle of being validated and having your efforts and your deeds be validated by someone else, like that shows up. His whole thing where like he's in the school all the time. He's seeing all these students. They do Oklahoma every year, and the students graduate, and he runs into them at the supermarket and stuff. Like that keeps coming back, where it's like the girls who were rehearsing Oklahoma while he's cleaning the theater. They're also the girls at the ice cream stand that Jake is like kind of afraid of. And it's like when that scene happens, you might be thinking like, well, why is Jake so afraid of these young women? And then you realize like, oh, it's because he's the old janitor. They see him as the old janitor, and they're judging him as like this weird old man. And then it's also like, the story of how he and his girlfriend met keeps changing. Like, it was at the bar during trivia night, and then, the janitor's watching that fake Robert Zemeckis movie.
Yeah.
That's really like corny and cliched. And then the story of them meeting is from the Robert Zemeckis movie, and then it changes back to the night at the bar, the trivia night at the bar. So like there's a lot of things that are introduced in one storyline and then come back up in another storyline that, further connects the Jake being the janitor.
Yeah. There's the washing machine is what comes to mind for me. She like starts pulling out the janitor outfit in the washing machine. I was like, oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I was gonna say, like, even if you didn't know that, like reading a synopsis of it, you could find out. And then also there's a lot of, like you said, there's a lot of context, there's a lot of clues scattered throughout the movie that makes you think, okay, yeah, Jake is the same person. But I wasn't exactly sure how the woman came into play until then. I started like, that's when I needed like, okay, the novel can help guide me kind of the rest of the way there. The synopsis of the novel can guide me the rest of the way regarding the context of like the woman in there. I will note that at first when I saw the two people dancing in the school, I was like, hey, we have another Under the Wheels movie where there's random
dance sequences.
Where there's a random dance sequence. But again, the dance sequence creatively plays a huge role in the movie, in my understanding of the movie. Although I thought it was going to be like metaphorical for like, oh, the janitor's going to kill Jake and then fucking rape what's her name, but like thankfully that didn't happen. And to be fair, like I don't think that was off property, considering like there's a very long detailed sex scene in Anomalisa where two puppets are like going through every step of how they fuck.
Oh god. Like, yeah.
Like I was a little nervous, and even seeing like the old man walking around in the nude at the end of the movie, I was like, fucking Charlie Kaufman, man. But I did think that it was interesting it was impressive that he was able to use a very well choreographed, very well shot dance scene and have that actually play on multiple levels in the movie instead of just like on a surface level, which a lot of the times dance sequences in movies do.
Well, and that dance sequence is also like based on Oklahoma,
which I found out later.
It would, yeah, I also found out later because I'm not familiar with Oklahoma. I just know Hugh Jackman was in it one time.
Yeah, Hugh Jackman was in it one time, and there's like a revival on Broadway where they're like, we're taking Oklahoma back. It's not as bad or as problematic as you think. We're addressing those elements now.
Oh gosh. So let's address the problematic elements of everything instead of just letting it be.
Well, I mean, I don't think that's necessarily a problem with something that's like a musical where they have a filmed version of how people thought it was back in the day.
That's true.
I don't think it's a problem for people, especially like a musical like Oklahoma that's like, you know, no one's doing Oklahoma except in high school. So if you put on a production of it, you need to bring something new to it. So the new thing we can bring is like, let's see what happened in it and maybe address some of this sort of like creepy 1950s sexism, if that's the case in Oklahoma. I don't know if it is. Or like how to succeed in business without really trying. If you're familiar, are you familiar with that one at all?
I don't like musicals. I don't watch musicals. I'm not familiar with musicals. Musicals bad. I not like. The
end. I think like do you like stage productions as well?
I don't like theater generally.
You don't like theater in general? All right. There's interesting things in theater that I wish they'd bring more into film, like really interesting blocking and staging that is sadly missing from most movies, but is actually pretty prevalent in this movie, which is kind of nice. But I think it was funny that Jesse Plemons was just like naming off a bunch of fucking musicals, like, oh, yeah, I'm not that familiar with musicals except for, you know, this.
And then he lists
this,
like
this,
all of them.
Yeah, all of the ones.
And you wonder if he's only familiar with them because he's a janitor at a high school.
No, I would say that's exactly why, because most of the ones that he listed, it's not like he listed anything like that you wouldn't do in like your high school, right? Like it's not like he listed like freaking, although he did say cabaret, so but he would do, you know, chorus line. He would do. I can't think of any musicals that you wouldn't do except for maybe, I don't know, fucking Striptease the musical. I don't know.
What?
I don't even know if that's a musical, but like I think it is because they perform them in the high school, and that's the only familiarity he has with them.
Yeah, I think it's implied that he's reasonably educated because it's like I think it's.
Yeah, isn't that the ultimate tragedy?
Yeah, well, because I think it's sort of like, you know, he went to college and he did study like physics or something. And you know, this girl in his imagination, he did see her on some trivia night, but they never actually met up or anything. It was just, he just saw her.
Right.
And then maybe he dropped out because his parents got really sick and he had to go take care of them. And that's part of why like he's so anguished, because it's like he doesn't want to talk about what he studies. He doesn't want to talk about the paintings. Like he doesn't want to talk about anything that he's good at or that he does, because he felt like he had to give it all up to take care of his mom and dad.
Right.
And that's why his mom is kind of like, you know, he works so hard. He's worked so hard. He's such a good son. You know, because he wants someone to acknowledge, like, he could have been great. You know, he could have been a contender.
Yes.
Exactly. If only, like, he had gotten better breaks in life or whatever, he wouldn't be this high school janitor. Which I think is part of why, I think that's a big chunk of his elaborate fantasy is, again, it's like wanting to be seen, wanting to be recognized. You know, there's that whole thing about the diligence pen. He's like, you know, I got a pen. It's like, oh, you know, Jake got a pen for diligence in 8th grade. Or no, when he was 8 years old. And he's like, I wanted the acumen pen. Acumen means you're smart. Diligence just means you work hard.
Right.
But the thing is like, he does work really hard.
Yeah. Well, and maybe that's why it's like maybe he's actually not that smart. He's not an intellectual. He always wanted to be, and that's why, like, that's how they differentiated. It's like, yeah, I could have been smart. I could have understood all this stuff, but like as she's reading back the critique of freaking A Woman Under the Influence, he's just kind of like, yeah, I guess.
He feels shut down because
Sure.
he really likes the movie, and then feels sort of like Pauline Kael is just run right over him.
Yeah, kind of like what you do to me on my favorite movies. Gonna freaking die in a car in a blizzard. You
can just call me Paul Kael. I actually don't like Pauline Kael. She just seems shrill and annoying.
I've never read anything that she's done. I just remember when she died, everyone was like, "Oh my God, Pauline Kael!" But then, like, you read a bunch of reviews where she was like the snide critic from freaking Birdman, who's like, "I need to come up with a clever line to put down your fantastic movie."
I know. She just seems like being mean for the sake of being mean.
Yeah, I think she is kind of like a like Roger Ebert was. He actually liked a good deal of schlock, but I feel like Pauline Kael is like the definition of like the critic in movies of like, she's the stuck-up snob who's like, no, your Marvel movies are trash, your DC movies are trash, Moonlight is trash because it's edited poorly. I mean, she probably would have loved Moonlight because it's like got a lot of...
No, she probably would have trashed it for being like too sentimental or something.
Yeah. All Spielberg movies are bad, even the good ones. Like Jaws is a steaming pile of shit because freaking Richard Dreyfuss lived.
Well, it's funny because like the review of Woman Under the Influence that is quoted in the movie just sounds like unbelievably
Pretentious?
Well, not only pretentious, but it's just like pointlessly mean. Like it sounds like she's grasping for reasons to hate the movie,
Yeah.
And that's kind of why, like, Jake's character, after listening to this rant about why Woman Under the Influence isn't actually that good, he's like, sure, but I feel like you're missing the point. You're so focused on details that don't matter, you miss the entire point of the movie.
Cue CinemaSins ding now.
Was Pauline Kael the original CinemaSins? Find out next time on Under the Wheels.
I mean, CinemaSins is like the freaking Lay's potato chip of like the original Pauline Kael, like thinly cut, fancy potato chip, where it's like at least Pauline. Because CinemaSins does their critique for no other reason than they want to get views and make fun of the movie. Whereas Pauline Kael put this like Pauline Kael is the gold covered potato chip, where it's just as bad as the other potato chips, but it's a lot more expensive and it pretends to know what it's talking about.
And like most potato chips, the bag is like 60% air.
Exactly. With that said, I've never read any Pauline Kael. I'm literally just going off of what you're telling me now.
Well, so, like, I've read enough quotes to know I don't much care for her opinions.
Yeah. I mean, she was like, I think she was she one of the first like mainstream female critics of movies?
She was like the first mainstream female critic. And not only that, I mean, I think she was the first mainstream critic who was kind of known publicly. Like a lot of movie critics up to that point were probably like, oh, this movie got a good review in the Times or whatever. Meanwhile, if Pauline Kael reviewed something, it's like, oh, Pauline Kael reviewed it. It wasn't the Times that reviewed it.
Yeah, she just comes in like freaking Ego from, what's it called? Ratatouille.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I guess it goes to show that, like, obviously she was very good. It's like successful at what she did and had this big influence.
Yeah.
But a lot of people said that, like, she could kind of ruin a movie, where it's like if she didn't like something, if she gives a bad
review, it's dead on arrival.
It's box office poison, yeah, which I think is just terrible. Because like one person's opinion shouldn't damn a movie to hell or ensure its success.
I'm guessing the reviewer of the critic in Birdman is like heavily based on her then. If that's
I think
the case,
every movie critic in every piece of media is heavily based on Pauline Kael.
Sorry. Anytime I think of movie critics, most people, I actually think of Roger Ebert and like Gene Siskel, because like
that's because we're of a certain age where it's like we had At the Movies.
Yeah, and I actually watched it after Siskel had died. I watched some of it with Roper, and like I
think I never watched Siskel. It was always Ebert and Roper for me.
I've watched some archival ones with Gene Siskel, and like in hindsight, I tend to agree with Gene Siskel's opinions of movies more than Roger Ebert. Even though Roger Ebert, again, he liked certain movies that were trashy. He was fine with it. He's like, this is my kind of trash. Give me them titties, as it were. But like, I find it funny because like Gene Siskel seems like he seems like he's cut off of the same cloth as like Pauline Kael, but in reality, he's like, I don't know. I feel like he's a lot more even keeled than I used to give him credit for.
One last note on Pauline Kael. I thought it was funny that as soon as the woman starts quoting her review, like a cigarette manifests out of nowhere and she starts smoking.
That's right. I remember that. I was like, that's so random. Like, what's that cigarette doing in here? I don't remember smoking. Kind of bringing it back to the movie, something that I forgot about until now. Like, why did she keep saying like I have to be home in time for work in the morning? Is that like a reference to like he needs to snap out of whatever mental thing he's going in because he has to get home so he can get prepped for what he has to do for work? Like, that was the one thing that like it kind of put a ticking time bomb and started building sort of like tension for me in the movie. But I was wondering what you thought about that.
I didn't think too much about it, actually. I thought it was just sort of a ticking clock to keep the movie going.
And like keep things kind of off center whenever he was like, hey, let's go and get ice cream, or hey, let's go and do this. And I was like, oh my God, you're fucking annoying, Jesse Plemons. Let her get the fuck home so she can work.
Yep.
Okay, yeah, so that's one thing that I was kind of like I completely forgot about, but was, playing on my mind. I did think it was interesting that like the point of view for the majority of the movie is told from her point of view, instead of like because it obviously it hides the cards, but it also makes it really interesting because he's like, I guess, existentially make her the perfect woman. But even in his mind, the perfect woman for him to be with is like, I'm thinking of leaving you. But and of course,
which I guess is like trademark neuroticism. Your ideal female figure is like also incredibly neurotic and keeps thinking about trying to break up.
it's like to the point where it's like, oh yeah, even the most ideal woman still doesn't like your ideal woman. They still don't want you. It's like, oh man, that's really sad and depressing.
Oh, that is depressing. I mean, it's interesting because it's like you have to accept that, a good chunk of the movie is taking place inside someone's head.
Right.
The question is, how much of the movie is in their head and whose head is it?
Which I think is like, that's kind of trademark Charlie Kaufman.
Yeah, but it's also like, the way you keep interest, the way you maintain audience interest in a movie is to ask a question that then they will wonder what the answer is. So I think it's smart. You need to have that question in order to keep people engaged. That like, okay, what's happening? How much of this is in somebody's imagination and whose imagination is it in? Right. And then those questions all get progressively answered as the movie goes on.
Or, yeah, you would hope. You would hope that it would start kind of making more sense as it goes instead of making less sense. Right? Because like for a time there, I was like, okay, I am understanding it's in someone's head because obviously she's doing voiceover narration, so there's already that part of it. But then, of course, like as the blizzard increases, I'm like, okay, the link with reality that we have is like metaphorically getting hazier and hazier, and we're losing it more and more because of this blizzard. Is the connection to reality, I guess you could say, or that's how I saw it.
It's also, they kind of, I think, explained the movie's central thesis a little bit during the second car ride, where after they get the blizzard, the smoothie, or the milkshakes, and they're going to go dump them at the school.
The concretes.
The concretes. The woman is getting really angry because he's like going off the freeway to this weird 1-lane road, and it's like, where the fuck is this going? Mm-hmm. And then, Jesse Plemons, like, it's funny, in the beginning of the movie, they drive out into the countryside, and he's like, I like road trips because they remind you that the world is larger than the inside of your head.
Yeah.
But then when they're going back and they're on this really narrow road in the blizzard, he's like, look, there is no objective reality. The world as you experience it is just a projection of your own mind. And she's like, just shut the fuck up, get back on the road. This road seems really long. Like, why, like, how do buses get down here? And he's like, see, the road seems really long. Mm-hmm. And she's like, go fuck yourself. Like, this road feels really narrow. There's no way a bus could get down it. And he's like, it feels really narrow.
But I can't turn around. The road's too narrow for me to turn around.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I remember that part too, yeah.
Yeah, so it's kind of like, I think the central idea in this movie, and in Anomalisa, and in Synecdoche, New York, is the world, it's this, what's the word for it? It's very solipsistic. It's like the world exists inside your own mind. There may or may not be an objective reality outside of it, mm-hmm. but that doesn't really matter because you'll never see it anyway.
Interesting take. God, you're bringing it, like, as I'm talking with you, like, I did enjoy the movie. It's one of those things where I was like, okay, I liked it. It wasn't, it's not the worst thing I saw. I enjoy kind of like psychological movies like this where it's like, okay, what's real, what's fake, and focus on the techniques that they use for it. Mm-hmm. But then I have to come to you for the whole like deeper meaning of it all, and like, oh my God, you're right, and that's what ties back to this part right here, and like why when she first said, I'm like, for example, I'm thinking of ending things, works on multiple levels, because it's like, oh hey, I'm thinking of breaking up with you, when in reality he's like, oh hey, maybe I'm thinking of ending my life.
Yeah.
So like it's like things like that have multiple dimensions like that. Luckily you can open. I was staring at the word Oklahoma, so that's why you could Oklahoma that up for me. The hell that means, but I do appreciate that stuff, because otherwise I would just focus on, like, for example, why Robert Zemeckis movie.
I know. Is that a dig at Robert Zemeckis, or did he actually ask Robert Zemeckis, like, hey, do you want to like direct a like 2-minute scene for me for this? But I really think it's just him shitting on Robert Zemeckis.
Like I can't go after Spielberg because Spielberg controls all the money, but I can go after Zemeckis because he's kind of like Spielberg. He makes like schmaltzy movies except for Beowulf, and it'll be fine. He made schmaltzy Beowulf. Schmaltzy Beowulf. I mean, there is that one scene where he's like, "Go and live, and your name will enter my mythology or enter my story and will be mythologized," and like cue Alan Silvestri's best score in a movie in the last like 20 years, as it's like building up to this like really emotional moment that may or may not feel earned in sort of Neil Gaiman speak. Dude, that movie's such a mess, but I genuinely do love it a lot. It's such a mess. It's so bad, but I don't give a fuck. Let's go back to I'm thinking of ending things. Also, there was that one moment where the woman literally turned into the actress from the movie that I was like, I did a double take as I was watching. I was like, what the fuck? Like, it actually unsettled me a little bit when that happened. I was like, oh,
exactly. It's interesting because it's one of those movies where it poses these questions, but the answer to those questions don't really mean anything. It's more like the meaning of the movie is in the experience of it, not so much like the answer to the mystery. Solving the mystery won't illuminate anything extra for you. It won't tell you anything more about what the movie's about or what it's trying to say. It's the mystery itself is what kind of tells you what the movie's about and what it's trying to say.
Which, I mean, I think, again, is a reflect from what I've read about the novel, is an interesting reflection of the novel. In the sense of, like, the author was like, oh, I want to, well, let me get into this, because reading the synopsis of the novel helped me inform what happened in the movie. And obviously certain things have changed. But I think this is probably going to go down as one of the better adaptations of the novel, because it's more focused on sort of like the themes of the novel, and it comments on pretty much all of the events of the novel without being as explicit as I think the novel may be in certain regards.
Yeah.
For example, at the end of the novel, I guess, they have two people talking about, like, oh yeah, there was a janitor here. Oh, we read his notes, and his notes talk about, like, all of this stuff that he's been kind of going back and forth about in the movie itself. But, like, the janitor is dead. Is the janitor Jake? Did the janitor kill himself? Is the janitor actually alive? Is this or that? Like, that, the ambiguity apparently is in the novel. And I think there's, like, that similar moment in the movie where it's like the janitor is, you know, walking in the high school naked, and, like, he's talking to the pig, and then, like, the car is just there. Is the janitor in the car? Did he freeze to death? Did the janitor actually go back into the school? Like, where, like, did the janitor go and kill himself with a knife, like in the Oklahoma scene? So, like, I think elements of that comment really well back to the novel. There was a couple more that they would do. Like, it's a good example of the movie using the tools of a movie to tell elements of the story, as opposed to just, like, a bad film adaptation would just have the scene play out exactly as it does in the book. Like, this would add to it, like bringing back the people who were in Oklahoma, bringing them back in the Dairy Queen as the same people, but not really drawing as much attention to it. You have to kind of figure that out yourself. Like, who is the person who has, like, the rashes and, like, everyone calls ugly? Like, who is that in the movie? Like, what does that mean? Who are we supposed to see that as? The fact that this was the other thing. The fact that the woman retells the story of how they met, but in her retelling, she's like when she's talking to the janitor, she's literally telling the character who experienced it, this event never happened. Yep. He should have gone and talked to her, but she had a boyfriend. He was scared. He never did talk to her. He's not smooth with the ladies. Blah blah blah. Like, instead of in the novel what might have been like a voiceover, or like an omniscient narrator telling him this thing, we have personified it, have them tell it, and then have the revelation that, like, oh hey, guess what? I don't even exist, but I've taken this time throughout the whole story as the narrator to now tell you explicitly. So I think the tools like that are used really well. And of course, the use of editing, or like the dog shaking back and forth over and over again, using the camera to sort of draw attention to various things, like the Pauline Kael book, the paintings without there was no moment where, like, she's showing the paintings on the phone, and then they go into the room, and, like, she looks at the paintings, and, like, you see the paintings there, and they're credited to someone else, and you're like, did she just steal these paintings? What's the relationship to this? Instead of her just being like, those are my paintings, I did those. Or, like, looking in the laundry machine, pulling out the janitor thing, and then, like, never really commenting on it, to where you're like, that's weird. Why does she keep pulling out the same thing with the same edit every single time? Like, what is going on? And then you find out later, like, oh, that's the janitor. He wears the same clothes. He does the same thing. He has the exact same routine every day. So we're gonna just keep using the same clip over and over. And so I like how a lot of it was sort of what would be told to you in the book is shown to you in the movie. And in those times where they couldn't make a straight comparison, they found a creative filmic way to do it instead. Like, for example, the dance scene.
There's also there's a lot of edits that you don't understand what the meaning is right away, especially at the beginning of the movie, but, like, once you think about them, having seen it all the way through, they make sense. So, like, at the very beginning, there's the voiceover narration from the woman where she's kind of laying out her concerns about life just generally. Yeah. And then she's waiting to get picked up, And the janitor is like eating breakfast and looking out the window and kind of like whispering to himself. And those don't make sense early on. You're like, why are these two things being cross-cut together? Are they happening at the same time? Are they in the same place? And it's like, well, yes, they are happening at the same time. Because this guy is thinking about this stuff as he's getting ready for work. But that doesn't always come together until towards the end when you realize, like, oh, okay, that's what this edit means. This is what's going on.
Yeah, the one that was always kind of like thrown out there, and then I was like, huh, is the swing set. He's staring at the swing set, and a couple of like 15 minutes later or whatever, they pass the swing set, and I was like, that looks familiar, and it's brand new. And it's like, oh, he's in a way, he's kind of like going through his entire life as well in that drive, and like sort of I find the use of a blizzard as an interesting device in the movie, of like how like the roads are very clean and clear when he's young. In this movie, they talk about how like people like to think about, you know, childhood, because when you're a child, like the whole world is open to you, and everything's good, and you can do anything you want to. And then as you grow older and older, you realize like that's not the case. And,
yeah,
like,
which is really hammered home repeatedly in the movie.
Right. But like that's also shown in like the blizzard. Like it like at first, you know, the road is relatively clear and it's not too bad, but then as it goes more and more, you know, he gets disassociated with reality, but also kind of like his own life starts to just like get crumpled. Responsibilities pile up like a snowstorm.
Yeah, and he's like thinking about, you know, when he was younger, kind of like during his college, like relatively close to his college years, when, yeah, the world seemed wide open, like the future could be anything. There's a lot of possibilities. Now it's many, many years later. He's been stuck in this janitorial position for ever, basically, and he hates it, but there's no real way out. And then like he kind of sees his parents and how their condition deteriorates, and they become more locked in. They start to lose their memory and lose their physical abilities. And like even his parents talk about how awful aging is, and like one of the woman's many professions which keeps changing, or I guess areas of study that keeps changing, is it goes from like physics to was it like gerontology or something? The study of aging. And she's talking about like how like inhumane our society is towards old people, which is like, it kind of reflects back on how Jake feels about dealing with his parents when they were really old and not really knowing how to take care of them or what to do. And then how he personally feels as an older man, being a janitor in a high school where everyone's young and full of like hope and, you know, excited for the future. And they look at him as like, ugh, this weird old man.
That'll never happen to me.
Yeah. No, the Keanu Reeves turkey neck is coming for every one of us. It will happen.
It may sneak up on you, and there's only so much beard you can grow to cover it, but you will get it. I will say though, he rocks it pretty well. I'm like, oh yeah, I can get behind old Keanu Reeves who could still kick my ass. That's the sign of aging. Keanu Reeves' turkey neck. He's gonna grow the George Lucas thing under his neck in like 10 years. Yeah, I mean, like, and again, going back to the blizzard, it's like the road was open. By the end of the movie, the road is a narrow path that only leads to one place, his place of work, where he has to work.
Yep.
Very depressing. This is a very depressing movie.
Well, it's a Charlie Kaufman movie. Of course it's depressing.
Yeah, that's true. I was like, in Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. No, that was depressing as fuck, too.
Yeah, the only one that's like not depressing is Adaptation.
With two Nicolas Cages, because how can that be depressing?
Two Nick Cages can never be depressing. It's just amazing.
Can you imagine? I guess it's a good thing that they didn't get Nick Cage to play the main character and the main villain in Mandy, because then it would just be too gloriously fun.
It would kill the mood that it's going for if he was both the hero and the villain in that movie.
But it might be worth it just to see Nick Cage kill himself. From a technical standpoint, why do you think they went with... I have my own thoughts on this, but why do you think they went with a square aspect ratio, which made the movie look... like, it made all of the camera moves look like really good. It was fun to see another movie in 4:3, but like that was like the first thing I noticed, was that it was like a squared off aspect ratio.
Oh, I never have ever paid attention to aspect ratios.
Oh my goodness, really?
Yeah.
So it's only like when I bring it up like into Five Bloods when I'm like, hey, look, it went to 35, and you're like, okay. And now it's back in 16, and now it's back in 4:3, and you're like, I don't care.
I don't care. Yeah, I mean, I only notice aspect ratios if it's like the Five Bloods, where it changes aspect ratios in the movie very obviously.
Yeah. Okay. I found it interesting that it was kind of because of the Lighthouse. Lighthouse was also in 4:3. So like I find it interesting whenever they do that. Like in the Lighthouse, obviously it was because like the movie takes place in olden times, but also because I think it unsettles audiences at this point. They're not used to it. It kind of gives this illusion of intimacy. So I was just kind of wondering if you even noticed it, I guess, or thought about it.
Nope.
Well, shit. There's that cul-de-sac gone.
Yep. I mean, why do you think they used that aspect ratio?
Because Charlie Kaufman is weird and neurotic.
It's claustrophobic, just like the inside of his head.
I mean, that's actually what I would have gone for, is that it is claustrophobic, but it's also like oddly intimate, because I know that's why they used it for a ghost story, is that it's sort of like hauntingly, oddly like nostalgic and yet unsettling because you're not used to it. But also like a square frame, because I think The Shining is also done in a pretty square aspect ratio. And that movie is all about using what you see to just be somewhat unsettled for some reason. So, according to the conspiracy theorists. So, I think...
Wait, what?
Like The Shining, right? I'm pretty sure that's... You haven't heard all the conspiracy theories about how like The Shining uses a lot of like advertising subtext and like subliminal messaging and images to elicit sort of like an unsettling response, like a random TV that is on but there's no power cord connecting it, and like Danny's just like staring at it, or how everything in the movie it's like even more rigidly conformed to exactly even distribution than any other.
Wait, but like, why is that a conspiracy theory? That's just a technical analysis of the techniques that Stanley Kubrick used to create atmosphere in that movie.
Because like because like on a surface level, yeah, I agree with you completely. Like, oh, the TV is supposed to be unsettled, or like you walk into the room that is clearly on the inside of the Overlook Hotel, but you can see outside. It's like, oh, that's weird and unnerving. But then like there's the whole group of people who are like, oh, every single piece of this is Stanley Kubrick trying to tell us that he filmed the moon launch, he filmed like the moon landing as like a Hollywood set, or like the reason why we had to change this or that is because of this. Like how every Stanley Kubrick movie, every single frame is analyzed to death, and it's like even worse than The Shining.
I think Kubrick's style is so cold and kind of obtuse but very specific that I think it just drives people crazy, and they start like reading really bizarre things into his movies, like, oh, The Shining is really a blueprint for how he faked the moon landing,
right,
using 1960s CGI, which was so great. Obviously.
But the flag waves in the wind! Why does the flag wave in the wind if the moon doesn't have wind? I mean, I know why, but...
Well, isn't it just because of, like, inertia? Like, the flag moves as you're planting it, right? Because it's, it's, like, attached to the pole, so you move it down through the air, or through the vacuum of space, plant it in the ground, and then it will continue to wave around because that motion will just kind of go on forever because there's no friction or atmosphere to stop it.
Yeah, but like putting it down in the ground, it might be like an up and down motion. Like the wave itself is because I'm gonna sound tin hatty here, but the wave itself is because they made the flag out of a particular material that will wave in sort of like the really low gravity of the moon, because NASA was worried that people would think it were fake if the flag didn't move.
That doesn't shock me.
It doesn't shock me either. That's why I'm like, it's far-fetched enough that I can believe that. I can believe that they wanted to make sure that they had something that would look like motion in zero gravity. But I digress. So that's why I think the aspect ratio is the way it is, and why I think specifically The Shining, out of all of Kubrick's movies, is the most sort of tin hat film out there.
Oh, not Eyes Wide Shut? There's people who think Eyes Wide Shut is a documentary. Like...
The real reason Nicole Kidman left Tom Cruise. Like, no, because The Shining, I feel like people have done things to The Shining that should be illegal by now, to analyze it to death. Like, that's why there's a whole conspiracy documentary on The Shining called Room 237, which I watched, and it's like really interesting, a little boring, but really interesting. And like one guy like runs the whole thing in reverse. Like he runs it superimposed, like running forward and backwards superimposed. And I'm like, that is really interesting. It is amazing how circular the movie is and how much of it is like the front half is reflected in the ending half. Mm-hmm. But like, I don't know if it means what you think it means, sir. So like, that's why anytime I get into like discourse about The Shining, I think like obviously to a certain level, the subliminal imagery is there, but then there's other things like someone's like, oh, it's a commentary on like the Trail of Tears, because in this scene you see that the Indian head is facing forward and you can see it. And then in this scene, like 2/3 of the way through the movie, the Indian head is facing away. And therefore, you know that like this is the American people turning their backs on the Indians and all of this stuff. And I was like,
oof.
What? What? So that's why the Shining to me, like, some of it, like when the guy walks over and like all of a sudden his desk becomes his penis, is like, okay, yeah, I can understand how you might think that's a thing. But like some of the other stranger things, like the fact that Jack is talking to Jack, like superimposed upon himself, both like 28 minutes into the movie and 28 minutes away from the movie, I'm like, I don't know about that. I don't think there's any extra meaning in there.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, Stanley Kubrick is maybe the greatest filmmaker of all time, and he's very, very meticulous and detail-oriented.
Yeah.
But I just don't know what it is about his movies that drives people to really wild speculation like that. I mean, like, Eyes Wide Shut, I kind of get it. I kind of get why people think it's a documentary, because shit like that does actually happen. But other than that, it's like, why all these bizarro readings of The Shining? Like... Also, and no one reads the book The Shining like that. No one's ever like, oh, Stephen King wrote this book about the Trail of Tears called The Shining. They direct all of that towards the movie.
I think because like in the book, like because in the movie, which a lot of people consider a really good adaptation of book to movie, not the book to the movie, but like bringing over central themes and things like that. In the movie, Kubrick uses visual imagery to like reinforce a different subtext, mm-hmm. or to enhance your reading of the book. Like I'm thinking of Ending Things. So instead of Stephen King like super high on coke and booze, just writing whatever he wants to on the page and not really proofreading it, like Kubrick can take all of that information, take out all of the stuff that he doesn't like, and see what stuff that he does like that he can enhance through visual imagery. So
a couple notes that I think are interesting. One, Kubrick said himself that he always preferred to adapt his movies from books, but he would only select books that he thought were like pretty good, but that he could improve upon. Mm-hmm. So, fuck you, Stephen King, is basically what he was saying.
It's all right, Stephen King. I'm pretty sure Stanley Kubrick and Stephen King fucking hate each other.
They hate each other.
Well, hate. No, I think Stephen King still hates him. Stanley Kubrick obviously is dead.
Kubrick is dead. Stephen King still hates him. But the other thing is that aside, yes, he cuts out all of the schmaltzy, cheesy, sentimental crap that's in the book version of The Shining, but they're ultimately about the same thing. It's about alcoholism and child abuse. Which I don't understand why people it's like, oh no, it's about like Native Americans or whatever. It's like, no, the book is about alcoholism. Stephen King himself is like, it's a book about alcoholism. And then Kubrick removed all of the sentimental stuff from the end and made it more kind of grim. But it's basically the same thing. It's a movie about alcoholism and child abuse. You know, it's just all a big extended metaphor for how Jack drinks too much. He's got anger issues, and he takes them out on his poor son and wife.
Which is funny because it drove Jack Nicholson to even more alcoholism, and it does seem like there may have been some child abuse on the set of that poor kid.
Well, there's definitely abuse of frickin' Shelley Duvall.
Yeah. Poor olive oil. Dude, I feel
Poor
so
olive
bad.
oil.
I feel so bad for her. Like, she, oh my God. I mean, even Jack Nicholson would, like, have nervous breakdowns on the way home when filming that movie.
I mean, I'm not surprised.
I'm not either. I've heard things. I think Sidney Pollack had this great story where he's like, oh yeah, the first day on set of a Stanley Kubrick film of Eyes Wide Shut, you know, I walk up to Tom Cruise, I shake his hand, and we go into the other room, and he's like, cut, great, that's it. And he's like, oh, this won't be that bad. The next day, 150 takes later, he's like, there's the Kubrick I've heard about. I'm like, fuck, dude. No.
Yep. Yeah,
Oh,
he was
jeez.
pretty brutal. You know, it's a wonder he had any recurring collaborators at all, at least on the acting side.
I agree.
You know,
Well,
like, it's crazy that Kirk Douglas is in 2 Kubrick movies.
Yeah, but after
everyone else
Spartacus,
is a one
he was
and
fucking
done.
outs. One other person I can think of is oh my God, I can't even. Dr. Strangelove himself. He was in 2 movies.
Oh, Peter Sellers.
Yeah, Peter Sellers was in
Yeah.
Lolita, and he was in Doctor Strangelove.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think he had like a recurring list of people like cinematographers, right? Obviously his editor could probably be the same person because the
Well, I would
editor
assume his,
sits in a room.
you know, behind the camera collaborators are a lot of the same people. But he almost never worked with any actors twice because I'm sure they're like, fuck this, I'm out.
Fuck this guy. One time, I want to work with them one time, which is
Although,
weird.
you know, one thing I thought was... Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
And one interesting story I heard is I think Ryan O'Neal, even though I think he and Kubrick fought a lot, as Kubrick did with every actor he worked with, and his performance was like panned viciously by critics. But someone asked, you know, Kubrick about it. It's like, yeah, you know, you and Ryan O'Neal fought a lot, and his performance wasn't very good. And then Kubrick is like, what are you talking about? I thought Ryan O'Neal was amazing.
Yeah, it sounds like. I will say the only person that I've heard who had a fantastic experience with Kubrick is Malcolm McDowell. And
I can see that. Michael McDowell seems like the perfect level of unhinged for Kubrick.
Well, also, like, it's funny because I know a lot of people who say that A Clockwork Orange is Kubrick's best movie, but that was the movie he did with, like, relatively lower budget, shot relatively quickly, with a lot of, like, non-actors. So it was, like, there were a lot of limitations imposed on him, and it's widely considered one of his best movies. Like, he didn't have to do 1,000 takes on any scene. He did, like, 1 or 2 and stuff.
I'm kind of the opinion that my whole thing with Kubrick, I know we're way off topic, but
It's okay. I feel like it is kind of related to Kaufman. So
my whole
go
thing
ahead.
with Kubrick is that I think what makes him really amazing is that when you ask people like who watch a decent amount of movies, like who's the greatest filmmaker of all time, the kind of canned, hackneyed answer to that question is Stanley Kubrick.
Right.
It's kind of like if you ask people, what's the best movie ever? They're like, Citizen Kane. It's same thing, right?
Right.
But I think, you know, because obviously the kind of movies you like, the style of movies that you like, the kind of directors you gravitate towards is also subjective. I think the reason why it's easy to pick Kubrick, at least for me, is that every movie he did introduced something a little new or a little different to the cinematic vocabulary for all other filmmakers to use, number one. And number two, in my opinion, you know, every movie he made from about the 60s onward is a great movie, and each one is better than the last one. So, like, my ranking of Kubrick movies is almost entirely chronological. Like, Eyes Wide Shut is number 1, Full Metal
Really?
Jacket is number 2, The Shining is number 3. I mean, I think I would put Clockwork Orange ahead of Barry Lyndon, but that's kind of the one area where it flips. And then, 2001: A Space Odyssey, and down and down and down. Like, I really do think every movie he makes, for the most part, is better than the last one. And he ended his career with the best movie that he ever made.
That's funny because and this is the other thing I know about Kubrick is that a lot of the movies that he make, that he makes, usually in the immediacy, are kind of seen as like, that was weird. I don't know if I totally agree with that. But then a couple of years later, a decade later, 2 decades later, they end up saying like, oh no, that was a masterpiece. Because it happened with 2001. I know Scorsese talking about it. He was like, I don't think I liked this picture. And then he reflected on it and he was like, yeah, this picture. And then reflecting on it, he was like, actually, I like it a good deal.
Yeah.
And it was the same with like Eyes Wide Shut for a long time was obviously the unfinished masterpiece because the editor finished the final cut of it. Kubrick didn't have final say because, he was dead.
Yeah.
But I think the sort of the discourse around it has kind of turned and people are incredibly appreciative of it.
Yeah.
Much more than when I first got into Kubrick.
Yeah, I think
Where
so.
they were like,
I
it's
mean,
the redheaded stepchild movie.
like I said, I think it's his best movie. And it's interesting because Charlie Kaufman has had a similar reevaluation of his work, at least as a director, because I know when Synecdoche, New York came out, I thought it was really good, if, a little just depressing at times, or all the time. Actually, fuck it. That movie's really depressing. But I thought it was really good, and it not only did audiences hate it, but most critics also hated it.
Right.
But I think, like, especially reading some of the news surrounding I'm Thinking of Ending Things, it sounds like that movie's been reevaluated by a lot of people. Like, everyone talks about it, when they talk about Kaufman generally, they talk about it very positively. So I'm thinking maybe, okay, almost 15 years after the fact, it's getting reappraised as actually being really good.
That was Roger Ebert's best movie of the decade. That was his favorite movie.
He was the only person who was like, I love this movie. And then everyone's like, what's wrong with you? Why don't you think Shadow of the Colossus is good?
Why not Shadow of the Colossus? Because video games can't be art. I'm like, that's kind of small thinking for you, Roger Ebert. But
well, it's weird because like the logic of what he's saying makes sense only up to a point.
His stance was games cannot be art because games are inherently like interactive. So even though you can have artistic elements such as drawings, like the art design, the sound design, visual imagery, cinematics, the actual gameplay itself inherently is not art.
My understanding of his argument was that he was likening video games to all other kinds of games, like board games, puzzles, things like that. And he's like, the problem with video games is that there's an objective, you to win, to beat a level, to come out victorious in some way, and that art can't have an objective like that. Art exists for its own sake and just for the experience. You can't go in being like, I'm going to win this painting.
Right.
I'm going to beat the final boss of this novel.
So I guess at that point though, like, not to like challenge a dead guy here who had very like rigid views on this, but like, isn't that inherent? Like, the goal of reading a novel is to finish the novel. Like in the most like sort of objective sense, the goal of reading a novel is to finish a novel. Taking out the whole,
I don't know.
Well, think about it. There's an objective. Like, you can start a novel and you can get information from it, but like ultimately you start reading a novel to finish it. And if you don't finish it, then you fail, like in a game.
But then what's the
I'm
purpose
arguing
of finishing it is to experience it, right? The experience is inherently the end. But with the game, it's not so much the experience, it's winning.
Well, but see, and then this is where, like, again, I know that I'm basically like putting you in the position of Roger Ebert, but the point, but like the reason why most people play video games specifically, and especially now, is not even necessarily to finish it, because the definition of like finishing the game has changed so much over time. Like, is finishing
so I
the
would
game 100%?
Say where Ebert's definition kind of gets muddy.
It's going to be at the same part, I think, for us. Go ahead. Yeah,
where his definition gets muddy is like a lot of games now, the goal is not to win or to finish, it's to experience it. The experience is the end. So in that sense, I think a lot of video games now could be considered art, whereas in the past, by his definition, they wouldn't be.
Right. Well, and then I mean, although he was even at a point where he was still alive when that was changing, because games like Grand Theft Auto had come out, and then things like Grand Theft Auto 5 I think were out at that time. And like, yes, you can finish the main campaign, but you're also living in the virtual world, experiencing the virtual world. But I also understand that, like, from a certain point of view, like, the playing of the game as an experience of like, oh, I'm playing Uno. You can't play Uno and make it look like art. Although I would say there are certain poker players who make poker look like art. But
I wouldn't go that far.
But like in video, and I remember one person took a stance of like, well, if you have multiple endings to a game, it inherently can't be art because you don't understand author's intention if you get to shape the narrative.
Author's intent doesn't matter. Rule number one of analyzing art.
Well, analyzing games in particular, rule number one should be the game is not limited to the art of the game is not limited to the story. Because I would make an argument that the design that went into something like Death Stranding, the crafting of the systems, or even in Shadow of the Colossus, the way that all of the systems work, is done in a way that I would say is like, this is like perfectly tuned might be bad, but I would even say like I could make a very bad argument for why like good game design is an art.
I think one game that perfectly fits the definition of art would be like Nazi zombies from Call of Duty Call of Duty World at War.
Ooh, defend yourself. Why?
So, because with Nazi zombies you can't win.
Mm-hmm.
You can only do a little better each time. You know, there is no goal other than to play and to experience it. You know what I mean? You can't win. There's no end. There's no ultimate objective. The objective is just to play and experience the game. The same way the objective of watching a movie is to watch the movie, or to look at a painting is to look at the painting. Mm-hmm. So I think in kind of a weird way, Nazi Zombies is an example of video games purely as art and not a game.
That's interesting. And again, if that is the case, I could even make an argument for something like a game that, like an old game, because I think Pac-Man ends up timing out, but at the time, Pac-Man just kept creating more and more boards until the system could not create a board. So again, like you said, I think Roger Ebert's argument is somewhat flawed, because even in like the Nintendo time period, like, you were playing Zelda to beat the game, sure, but you were also playing Zelda because you wanted to experience the game of Zelda and experience running around catching bugs like Shigeru Miyamoto did as a kid and killing things, which apparently he also did, killing moblins and stuff. Yeah, exactly. In a really weird Peter Pan analogy. But like, since we're fully on weird digressions, let me try and bring it back to I'm thinking of ending things. Specifically in like the connection to Kubrick, because I think for a lot of people, like, one other reason people like Kubrick movies a lot is because it works on multiple levels. And that's another thing that I like about Christopher Nolan's films, is that there tends to be like multiple intellectual levels at work. There's like the popcorn thrill level. There's also like the look at this interesting idea level, and like the melding of those two is what keeps me engaged. It's like, oh, this is the creative way, and then this is the execution of that creative way. And I think with Charlie Kaufman's movies, because I did read a little bit about Synecdoche, New York, the fact that the name of the movie also references what Synecdoche is in reality, I'm like, oh, that's clever. I like that. Or how, like, I'm thinking of ending things, the title of it operates on multiple levels. There's a lot of different things, like the way the blizzard works that I keep coming back to, because that's my favorite thing about the movie. There's so much in the movie that is really interesting and works on multiple levels, that he's almost like a more sophisticated, less blockbustery version of Christopher Nolan.
Yeah, it's funny because I mean his movies are all about kind of reflexivity and taking a set of ideas and continually reinterpreting them, just to kind of show that they can mean all these different things.
Yeah, I wonder if, because I haven't seen Being John Malkovich, I've seen Eternal Sunshine, I have not seen Synecdoche, New York, I've seen Anomalisa, and like it feels like the endings to his movies are getting more and more bleak, if that makes sense. Now I know he wasn't the only writer for Eternal Sunshine, so some of the positivity might have come from Michel Gondry, but like the fact that like they do meet back together, like even though they've erased their entire lives together, they do find a way to come back and connect with each other and potentially start over anew. It's kind of like, it's either you can look at the cynical way of like, oh, it's history repeating itself, or the schmaltzy way of like, oh, they're back together again and they could make it work this time. But in this, there's like very little, like it's just like, okay, it's the ending to this is just depressing or more depressing depending on how you look at it. So
it's depressing option A or depressing option B.
Just like with Anomalisa, it's like,
I mean, Synecdoche, New York is a pretty depressing ending because the entire world ends, essentially.
I'm guessing it's one of those things where like the world that he's building in the warehouse starts to collapse, and therefore, since that is the manifestation of the world that he believes he is in, that also starts to collapse. Something like that.
Something like that, yeah. And then he dies.
And then oh, Philip Seymour Hoffman, always dying in movies.
Yep. Did you see his son is going to be in the next Paul Thomas Anderson movie?
Is it? Is he?
Yep.
Apparently, people used to call Jesse Plemons like Philip Seymour Hoffman, which is why he was probably the son of Philip Seymour Hoffman in The Master.
Yeah, it could be. He's not like nearly the actor that Hoffman is, though.
I want to talk about this because obviously you could probably guess I'm fascinated by Jesse Plemons because I don't get it.
Looks kind of weird.
No, I just don't get it. I don't get how. Granted, I haven't seen Fargo, the series, but like how does he keep getting roles in movies? Is my question. So, how do you think he did in this movie? First off,
Yeah, I thought he did pretty good.
yeah, I did too.
I mean,
thought
it's
it was
not
okay.
like, I mean, he does well enough. Him and the lead actress. I think they don't have the opportunities to be incredible the way that like Toni Collette and David Thewlis do. But I think it's more of a function of what their roles in the movie are.
I actually liked the girls played by Jessie Buckley. I'm not familiar with her at all. I didn't realize she was Irish, so I think she had to put on a fake like Midwestern accent the entire time. So she's dealing with a lot on that. But I thought she did really well. Like obviously she wasn't kind of over the top like Toni Collette and David Thewlis were. But like the really long monologues that she did have to deliver, I was like, oh, I can see her easily like taking those moments and putting them in her demo reel, because I thought she delivered those really well.
Yeah.
But like for me, Jesse Plemons is like the definition of mumblecore, because like I started seeing him in Friday Night Lights, and I was like, who is this horrible actor? Like, why was he hired? But then like he's in Breaking Bad, he's in a bunch of Spielberg movies, he's in freaking The Irishman, and I'm like, he's just like, he's so unincredible. He's just so like normal and bland, and maybe that's the draw. Well, with a twinge of like psychotic, because like every time I see him, I'm like, whenever a coin is flipped, Jesse Plemons can either be normal or psychotic. That's how I feel about him. But like, I don't understand how he keeps getting like. He has a career that I think a lot of people would just be super jealous of, because he's worked with a bunch of great directors. I'd include Charlie Kaufman in that. Like Paul Thomas Anderson, Spielberg, Scorsese, Kaufman. He's been nominated for a freaking Emmy, I think. Like I don't get it. Every time I see him, I'm like, I don't understand why you were cast in this. Even in this, like he did a good job because he does play sort of like creepy, like I stay at home and think about women more than I actually go out and interact with women. And so he's kind of perfect for that. But like, I'm always amazed that he's had as stellar a career as he's had, I guess is the long and short of it.
Yeah, I don't know. He's just kind of a funny looking guy who's in a lot of movies.
That's true. Did you watch El Camino, the Breaking Bad movie?
No, I haven't seen anything Breaking Bad related ever.
Oh, There's this moment where they have a flashback of Jesse Plemons in the series, and then they cut back to him and he's in the movie. And, like, it's supposed to basically take place at the same time, but Jesse Plemons gained a good, like, 20 pounds in between when he was off of Breaking Bad and the movie. And, like, all I could notice was, like, his gut just kind of hanging out. His gut and his dad. But I was like, oh, my God, this is very distracting. All right, that's my rant on Jesse Plemons. So let's... Is there anything else you want to talk about, or do you want to get into ratings?
We can get into ratings.
I think you're going to surprise me, because I'm not sure which way you're going to go on it. So I'll go first.
Okay.
I think the movie is a very high witness for me. I think that there's a bit of sort of like an accessibility issue for a lot of people. I don't think a lot of people will be interested in it. And even though it holds your attention really well, I think people will start to squirm just because, for example, they start off in the car. And I find all of the stuff that happens in the car interesting. I thought it was going to be a 90-minute movie of just two people in a car, to be honest.
Like Locke?
Yeah, kind of. Well, yeah, except two people instead of just Tom Hardy and a phone. So, like, from a technical point of view, I think the movie is fantastic. I think we've gone on a long time talking about how sort of like the underlying themes of the movie, sort of like the unseen stuff in the movie, is endlessly fascinating as well, and how you piece the movie together and yet still will never get a complete picture of the puzzle is also really interesting. But I think that's a lot that would be really hard for a lot of people to access. And even though I love a lot of that stuff, I think my problem is that, like, I would have liked one more piece of the puzzle or another piece of the puzzle.
I'd give it like a low shiny in Chrome.
Yeah, that's kind of where I thought you were going to come from. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, because it's like technically it's amazing. It holds your attention really well. It's very tense. It's very kind of weird and interesting. I think a lot of the character interactions they're not only a lot of fun to watch, but they're also a lot of fun to dissect. Obviously, the parents' performances are just hilarious and awesome, and they get to chew plenty of scenery and act like really weird. I do see what you mean about there being an accessibility issue, but I don't care about accessibility. I think...
Well, this is a very you kind of movie. Like, as soon as about 5 minutes in, I was like, yeah, I think Gabe's gonna like this movie. I can see this being his kind of movie.
I mean, yeah, I don't really care if movies are obtuse or kind of vague about what's happening or confusing, because I think, like, you know, I think audiences should be made to do a little work sometimes, piecing things together. I don't think.
Well, I think the audience should have to do that a lot of the time.
Yeah, I don't think movies should encourage lazy passive watching. I think it's kind of held back by the same problem as Don't Look Now, where the movie's technical aspects and the details of the story are more interesting than the story itself.
Yeah, I think maybe that's why I kind of hold it to a witness.
Yeah, well, because it's like, I think a problem that a lot of movies can run into, and I know Under the Silver Lake had this problem for some people, it's that you can have a very dense and very layered movie, but if the overarching story or themes aren't as interesting as all those layers and all that density, I think a lot of people will feel let down. And I think that quality holds this movie back for me. I think it held Under the Silver Lake back for a lot of folks. I think it also held back Don't Look Now for me, because it's like, you know, every one of these is pretty technically immaculate. They do a lot of cool stuff. They do a lot of interesting things. But at the end of the day, it's like, okay, yeah, but this is, you know, it's just a janitor's kind of mind rambling.
Yeah.
I think a big part of that is the more you disconnect the diegetics of the movie from what's actually happening in, like, capital R reality, the harder it is to feel engaged with a lot of the cool things that are going on. It's kind of like, I don't know, it's kind of like watching a fight where there's a fighter who does a lot of really cool shit that you're like, wow, this is really cool and interesting, the stuff that he's doing. And then he gets, like, submitted.
See, I was going to say, like, in your analogy, I was like, I don't know, because I like, if you have a fighter who does a lot of, like, really cool, flashy moves, but then you have another fighter who does, like, nothing but Shotokan and is like very meat and potatoes. It's just like point A to point B fighting, and that fighter wins. I'm like, yeah, but I kind of like the meat and potatoes part. And like maybe that's the issue, is that, like you said, the underlying thing of the movie is like, it's all about a guy who's just kind of sad that he never talked to this girl way back when, and his life never kind of manifested the way he wanted it to, and so he wants to kill himself. And if you put the movie like that, it's like, oh, it's about a janitor who's depressed because he like Holden Caulfielded and like he just commits suicide. It's like, yeah, that's not as interesting. But
yeah, well, I think it's just sort of like the idea of someone, of having this massive dream narrative of someone kind of reevaluating their life while they're also living it. So the two merge together, like his feelings about the present mixed with his fantasies of what could have been and what he wished for himself. Like, that's really interesting as long as it kind of leads to something.
Right.
Or at least, or even if it leads to nothing, it's almost more satisfying than if it leads to just kind of like, oh, he's sad, Like, if it leads to him making a change in his life, that's an interesting and satisfying conclusion. Or if it leads to nothing at all, we never leave the dream, that's also interesting and satisfying because you don't really need an external resolution. But if you bring in the external world and the external resolution is nothing happens, he's just sad boy, then it's kind of like, why?
I think about that. What you said reminds me of. Did you see Manchester by the Sea?
Yes.
Okay, so like to me, I watched the entire movie and I kind of came away with it being like, why did I watch this? Because like to me, it felt like there was no change from like where the movie began to where the movie ended. It was like, oh, Casey Affleck can't take care of Kyle Chandler's kid. He knew that at the beginning. Then the end happened. He knew it at the end. Oh, Casey Affleck lost Michelle Williams. He doesn't have her at the end, and they're not going to restart it. So I was all like, that's anytime it's like a character in stasis, I always think of that movie, even though I did kind of enjoy the movie. Like, I'm always like, I mean, I guess part of it was that's the point, but that always of makes me upset when that is the point.
I'm not a huge fan of Manchester by the Sea just because I think it's kind of boring. I mean, the performances are all great, but like I do think that there is a change in Affleck's character. It's just very subtle, and I think that's more the point. It's like he's not going to go through this sudden reversal where everything's better, but he can kind of, he can kind of flick the pebble that will eventually turn into an avalanche that changes things.
Yeah, and like as I reflected on it, I was like, oh, that was the point. It had, it was like the inch of change as opposed to like the groundbreaking, ground-shattering moment of change. Yeah. But again, that's kind of what makes me wonder about this, because like the change in this movie is that like theoretically he's gonna kill himself.
Yeah.
Right. Like he's thinking of ending it. That's his want at the beginning, and at the very end he either does or he just like goes off into La La Land in his mind and becomes a freaking like delusional vegetable, for lack of a better anything. But yeah, I guess I know what you mean by like the conclusion being somewhat unsatisfying, even though to me that conclusion is somewhat satisfying. I'm torn. I am torn. Like, I don't know how you would end it any differently.
I think you don't show the car covered in snow.
Interesting. So you just have him walking with the pig?
You end it with the speech.
Oh, that's right. That's how it ends, with the speech. Yeah. I keep forgetting about the speech. Like in their like, I liked that too. Like the fact that he's making this huge speech at the end and like they're all in like old people makeup.
Yep.
But it's like done really badly. Or done for a stage show. I was like, oh, yeah. That's so much. There are so many great little things in the movie that work really well. So a witness and a shiny and chrome. Yeah. I mean, like, it's, again, the thing about accessibility for me is like, will I want to put this on and rewatch it? Because in a movie like this, it helps to rewatch it because there are things that, or, just talk to you because you have a great memory for these things. But like, it brings up like, oh, I didn't realize that connection here, or I didn't see that connection there. So that's why the accessibility thing is kind of like a thing for me.
Yeah.
That's the only reason.
You know what movie's super rewatchable? Ad Astra.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was. Did
you watch it again recently?
Well, it was on TV, and I was like trying to do stuff, but I kept just stopping and standing in front of the TV looking at it because it's so eminently watchable. And I'm like, fuck, this movie's so good. I needed to like go run errands and whatnot, but I can't get away from the television.
It's more than just Space Monkeys, damn it. I found that like I'm not a huge James Gray fan because I haven't watched really any of his other movies except for Lost City of Z and Ad Astra. But I found myself coming back to Lost City of Z. Like I think I've seen it twice, but I'm always like, yeah, I should put that back on again because like that is one of the more interesting exploration movies that I've ever watched. Like anytime I see a World War I movie, I always think about what he said about filming a World War I sequence. And you have all the fucking rats and we made the tunnels like perfect for what they actually were in the time, and it was a pain in the ass to shoot that. And I'm like, yeah, World War I movies, Lost City of Z, good stuff. So yeah, I can see Ad Astra being very rewatchable because like I'm thinking back to it now and I'm like, yeah, I wouldn't mind putting it on and like sitting down and kind of going through it. So
yeah.
So what would you rather watch, Ad Astra or this again?
Probably Ad Astra.
It's bad because I feel like that undermines this movie, but really I would say take a chance on it. If you're not sure, definitely take a chance on it because I think you'll get something out of it. Even if you don't like it, I think you'll still get something out of it. Anything else you want to say aside from potential plugs?
No, I mean, I think that's about it. So our website is now underthewheels.com. Very simple, very straightforward. If you're listening to this podcast, you probably already know that we're available on Apple Podcasts and Stitcher, but also on YouTube. So
yes,
if you're one of those people who likes to listen to podcasts while you're at work and have like a browser tab open, you can do that now. And you can always email us with questions or comments or hate or love at underthewheelspodcast@gmail.com. Be sure to follow us on Facebook. Music by Mike.
Yep.
And I think that's all the plugs, right?
Yeah, that's all the plugs I can think of, yeah. Cool. In that case, we have just talked extensively about I'm thinking of ending things, and I'm thinking of ending things for this podcast right here. My name is Matthew.
I'm Gabe, and I knew you were gonna go there, but I was hoping you wouldn't.
I was like, I need a clever out for this, and now the whole thing's been ruined. All right, we just threw I'm thinking of ending things under the wheels. I'm Matthew.
I'm Gabe. We
you
already did this. Bye, everybody.
Well, we have to do it one more time because I can't just say like you've just been under the wheels and end it there, can I?
You've just been under the wheels.
Boom. I have not read your Bikini Bottom review yet. I look forward to it, but I saw how many words it was, and I was like, "Fucking A, dude."
Well, it's a video game. You know, video game reviews are always going to be longer than movie reviews, just because it's not like you can just sort of summarize the plot, the cinematography, the score, acting, writing.
Did you do like a level by level breakdown? Because I've read video game reviews. Yours is like a fact.
I felt like mine wasn't even that long. It's literally just like background of the game, what's new, so it's like graphical improvements, gameplay, the general sort of vibe of it, difficulty level, multiplayer, and then a summary.
Okay. Again, I haven't read it yet, so I am actually looking forward to reading through it. I think, like I'm making fun of you now, but I'm looking forward to reading it.
It's a good game. I liked it a lot. I had a lot of fun with it.
I feel like you have a blind spot when it comes to SpongeBob.
A little bit, but I think it's also just this is a game that I played growing up, so it's kind of got like that Lego Star Wars sort of nostalgia for me.
Yeah.
And it's also just, like, I mentioned this in the review, but, like, every game these days is so... there's, like, an arms race to see who can be the most, like, dour and self-serious and self-important. And then this game came out. It's a remaster that no one asked for.
Yeah.
That came out in the middle of an incredibly shitty year, and it's just, like... it's bright, silly, and fun, and it's a good kind of break from reality.
Finished.